Community Unit District 201, being held today, March 16th, 2010. A roll call, please, Ms. McMahon.
Ms. Casey?
Here.
Mr. Charleston?
Here.
Mrs. Charlton?
Here.
Ms. Kelly?
Here.
Mrs. Lubeck?
Here.
Mr. Price?
Here.
Mrs. Thomas?
Here.
If we can all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. The first thing we want to do, we were talking ahead of time, can everybody in the hall hear okay? Okay, good, because we can adjust the volume if need be, so we just want to check. The next thing is just another kind of a housekeeping matter. We had talked about today at our agenda meeting. We're having this meeting tonight, obviously talking about cost containment and budget. Then we have another regular board meeting on Tuesday, March 23rd. Then we have another regular board meeting on Tuesday, April 13th, and a board meeting on April 27th. And we had talked in the past about having a public forum. And so if the board agrees, we had talked today about potentially doing this on Tuesday, April 27th at the regular board meeting. And so the meeting would be a board meeting and a public forum. So we'll talk about that tonight, and if everybody agrees, rather than having a separate date. Okay. And in addition, every meeting has public comments, so if anyone wanted to make a comment, make sure you fill out a card. All right.
So just to clarify, is that going to come up then somewhere on the agenda tonight?
Well,
Discuss.
we talked about that for the agenda for next week, that it would be on there, just
Discuss
to
the date.
to talk about that.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Public comments. Linda Hool, please.
Good evening. At the time of my State of the Libraries report in February, I was not aware the job of any librarian was on the line. At last week's meeting, the WTA proposed that the job of the junior high librarian be cut due to my retirement, with no discussion about the impact on students, staff, and curriculum if one librarian is to manage 2 schools. So as certified professional with 24 years experience, junior high media center director for the past 17 years, and a 33-year member of this community, I felt I'd be remiss if I did not speak tonight about the negative impact the elimination of any library position would have. In the most recent Illinois School Library Media Association newsletter, which came out last week to the entire state, there's an article promoting your library, written in collaboration with Christina Stoll at MLS and our own Ms. Pergandy and Mrs. Therese. In describing Mrs. Therese's job at Westmont High School, Mrs. Stoll defines that which each of us does: library management and oversight, collection and program development, professional development and technical support, leadership and technology integration, information literacy instruction, and student engagement in reading and critical thinking. Mrs. Therese, Mrs. Johnson, Ms. Pergandy, and I are your library media specialists and your technology facilitators. Last week, I turned to Ms. Stoll for the Metropolitan Library System for her assistance. Working with Alice Calabrese, the executive director, they prepared a letter which should have gone out to your email addresses today. Ms. Calabrese notes that as your certified school librarians, we are providing information literacy skills to the 21st century learners, as well as teachers and instructional partners. Any elimination of a position would have a negative impact. We would be below the minimal requirements of 300 to 599 students at the elementary librarian, with the requirement of 1 professional librarian and 1 paraprofessional. And we would be below for the 500 to 999 of the high school level. Combining the responsibility for 2 buildings at any level will put us in violation of our MLS membership. That means loss of the state grant, delivery of statewide material, workshops, consultant support, supply discounts, and even possibly our Westmont Public Library account. The librarian serves every student and staff member in our schools. This week, Mrs. Johnson and Ms. Burgandy will see every student for 80 minutes for project-based learning or reading besides all their other responsibilities. At the high school, Mrs. Therese can teach 3 or more classes and supervise students every period and before and after school, along with her responsibilities. At the junior high, I am very much the instructional partner, particularly with my colleagues in the language arts department. I am currently involved with all 6 classes of 8th grade language arts as we work on the Decades Project that started in February and will go through May. We work together every single day. Where do we stop and divide our day? Where do we stop and cut the fabric of our curriculum? Referring back to Ms. Stoll's ISMA article, she mentions an article in the American School Library Board Journal from this past January. In The Future of Libraries by Lawrence Hardy, he states, researchers say that students' seemingly innate facility with new technology belies a widespread naivety regarding the abundance of information they're retrieving, its accuracy, reliability, usefulness, and impartiality. Young people need guides and teachers as much in the so-called information age at any time before. In 1984, when I first came into District 201 as a volunteer mom, I was taken aback at how backward this district was. Now in 2010, we are developing a program that can truly meet the needs of our 21st century learners. So where once this community might have accepted a program with little or no information literacy skills, we cannot take a step back. That model is no longer acceptable. Our program has taken flight. Consider what we have already accomplished and how the loss of even one certified library media specialist can impact the most important thing in this district, our students. Thank you, and if anyone from the community would like to hear more about our jobs, we would love to share and invite all to be part of encouraging students to be best at finding and using information as lifelong learners. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Linda, I'm going to go out on a limb like I always do whenever you present to the board. I just want you and the community to know that I totally support your position on this, and personally will do whatever I can to advocate for it, because I agree with the points you've delivered and how you have worked over the past several years to get us to where we are now. And I do think it's something that affects the students on a day-to-day basis. So when I talk about trying to spare things that most directly affect students, that would be something to highly consider, and I'll try to convince my colleagues of the same.
Jonathan McKay?
You know, you addressed the people in the hallway to see if they could hear, asked if they could hear.
Right.
I'm concerned about the overflow room because there was concern in that room too that people could not hear. So could you address the overflow room as well?
Yeah, and
Mr. Carr just went to
we
check.
want to check.
In this room, can you hear as well? I know there was some concerns last week when there
No,
were
they
some
can't
in.
hear. No, can't hear.
Okay.
It's not open right now. There's no overflow.
There's some seats in here, like quite a bit. If you want to come on in here. Okay,
Good.
come on.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jonathan McKay, and I'd like to take you back in time 9 months or so. I don't know if most of the folks here realize, but last May and June, this board went through $500,000 worth of cuts to the budget in this fiscal year. A lot of things were things that we didn't notice. It impacted teachers, it impacted convenience, things like that. But I'd like to take you back to one thing that stuck in my head back then. And today I went and looked at board meeting minutes and listened to podcasts and things like that. And I'd like to share that with you. There was two meetings. May 19th, where initial cuts were proposed, potential cuts, and then June 16th, where decisions were made on those cuts. In between, there's a special finance committee meeting that was held to look at those cuts. What I'd like to do is just look at the junior high choir piano accompanist issue. One position, $36,000, was on the cut list, just accompanying piano for the choir in the junior high. There were folks who spoke at the public presentation, including a parent. From the minutes of the superintendent's report, it talked about a lengthy discussion, and it's interesting. Amongst the longest discussion of all of these $500,000 item was a 10-minute discussion of the impact of cutting a piano accompanist, including a Q&A with Kathy Delanoy, who's the choir director in the junior high. And everybody, according to the podcast, had input on this. And the request was, can we figure out an alternative to deleting this position? Can we do some kind of part-time, or what else can be cut instead? And the entire cut list was delegated to a special finance committee meeting that was scheduled that evening. From the minutes of that meeting, I wasn't able to attend that one, and there's no podcast. The committee reviewed the cost containment options presented at the May 19th board meeting. The committee recommended forwarding the same list, the one-pager of options, or two-pager, to the whole board with the following modifications, one of them being provide a range of options for the accompanist position. What that worked out to was Dr. Ball was directed to contact other schools. I don't know if he did or delegated, to see what they were doing at the time. Maureen Jones went and figured out different cost models for different options of doing this, whether keeping the accompanist, eliminating, or two different kinds of part-time options in between. It was analysis of how the time was spent in junior high school there between the different choirs and the accompanist. Putting it all together was quite a thorough analysis. At the June 16th board meeting, there was a half-hour discussion on this one position. Now remember, we're talking about cuts that are 20 times this, and the easy stuff was taken care of last spring. There was a half-hour discussion with everybody participating, again, really concerned with what do we do with this. And at the end, the decision to cut the position was overridden by 4-3 vote, with the 4 votes being, let's maintain a part-time position with that. So think about all of this effort put in, and analysis and work, homework done behind it for one position. And now we've had weeks of having a 1 or 2 page list with things that still say things like French fries. There are things in here that were discussed last week, like eliminating a secretary at Miller. And the discussion was that if there are 2 secretaries and one is now reduced, if there's a sick day, the person is out or on lunch, the principal would have to cover the phones. And now principal is tied to the office. But it wasn't an impact in terms of what does that mean in terms of the principal's job? What is the principal not going to be doing? And so the ripple effects of these decisions haven't been defined. And so as a result, there's going to be a public meeting on April 27th where most of this list it appears to have absolutely no impact at all with the district. Eliminated position here, a secretary here, a little bit here, and there's got to be ripple effects. Think about all the work that was done for the piano accompanist. And by the way, the second list here recommends wiping out both the junior high and the high school accompanist. So there's all kinds of questions that come up, and I just don't have the time. I took like 10 minutes to just put down questions of what it would take to clarify this a little more so the public would be able to actually weigh in terms of what this means. For example, eliminating a dean position at the high school. I still don't know what the dean does. I don't know how many of the people on the board know what the dean does, and I'm sure most of the folks out here don't know what the dean does. But if that position were disappeared and those responsibilities were shifted to the assistant principal and the principal of the high school, and if those duties had to be done, what's going to disappear? Will Nancy Bartos-Thompson not be able to do any more of her service work with students or run things on personal development for students? Will that just all go away? These are the kind of ripple effects that the public and you guys need to know to make these kind of decisions. If you put that much effort in only 9 months ago on a piano accompanist for the junior high, how can you not put in that much effort for all of these important positions and demand that kind of analysis and homework be done for each of these potential cuts you're looking at? Does anybody want the documentation of this?
Sure. Yeah, sure. That'd be great.
Thanks.
all the stuff from 9
And your
months ago.
questions?
And this is
These
just
are the
some
questions?
questions.
Thanks.
Some of the,
And I'll take one at some other date, too.
To address a couple things, Mr. Carr actually had sent along an analysis to certainly to board members that talked in great detail about the effects of different cuts in the high school building. So, and in particular, he touched on the dean, he touched on some of the librarian stuff, he touched on several of the the athletic questions, some of the questions related to student fees, especially with respect to things like field trips and other things. So, I mean, there was any number of things. In addition to that, I mean, I think I especially appreciated Grant's conversations last week in terms of the WTA's feelings about the impact of certain positions on curriculum effect and other things. This is, from my vantage point, this is an especially fraught with angst sort of time. There is just a lot of bewilderment, a lot of just concern about where are we going, have we talked about it enough? We started in earnest this process of talking about how to contextualize the conversation first. You know, what's the objective in the budget cuts? You know, get us out to 2015, being part of that conversation. And then subsequent to that, we asked the administration and the staff and others to look at places where we could get to 2015. We started in earnest that process of looking at a list of things, actually at the February 23rd meeting, I think. And then again, last time, we're going to look at it some more and talk some more tonight. We will talk, no doubt, some more at our next meeting and at several meetings thereafter. So would that we had the time every evening that we met to stay until midnight or 1 a.m. and talk about all of these things fully. Unfortunately, I don't feel like we need to do that to fully vet, given that we have reached out to all of the staff, all of the administration, and a number of things. So this is a long-winded way of saying I'm committed to a full vetting process, to a full conversation process. And I think every board member at this table is fully committed to a full conversation. I don't know how long that conversation goes per se. We know that it's not infinite. We know that it's finite because at some point we need to make some fairly critical decisions. And as an old friend of mine used to say, at some point you got to jump off the bridge and see if you can swim to the water, swim to the shore. But at some point we're going to have to make decisions. So we'll continue to vet the conversations. We'll continue to talk about context, and I think that's critical that we talk about context. Not just that we talk about line items, but that we talk about context. Short-term strategy, long-term strategy. What do these numbers mean? Both in the context of their impact on a kid's experience during that day, as well as our district's health going forward. So, there are clearly competing priorities. There is a finite and limited amount of resources, and they are getting smaller. And it's unfathomable to me that the state of Illinois could so the right word, drastically is not a big enough word. Catastrophically, sort of impact the way local public schools are funded. Catastrophically impact the way local public schools are funded. So we appreciate Mr. McKay. I know your concerns are no doubt shared by others, and just my long-winded way of saying we're committed to a full conversation, publicly, privately and otherwise. So I'm looking forward to having that in the, at least as a way of getting to a decision, or to a set of decisions that hopefully most people can live with, although I suspect that nobody will be happy with.
And I guess I'd like to add to that and say that I hope that by the time the board actually makes decisions, that people feel that they have seen the board discuss for many hours what it is that's in front of us. I hope people feel that you have an opportunity to speak. I know we are getting emails. I thank everybody for taking the time to write with your opinions, because that's the only way we're going to hear what is important to our district. And again, I think as far as I'm concerned too, I think if some of the items that are in front of us and are certainly going on countywide and statewide, that some of these discussions are strategic in nature, and I, for one, would like to, anything that does change the nature of how our school is run, I would like to incorporate that in our strategic discussion plan starting up in August. So I hope that people understand. I'm hoping that people are paying attention, and that, and I don't mean that flippantly, I mean that to hear what Dan's saying, what Linda's saying about that we're all going to really take a look at what is in front of us and come to the decisions not lightly, and weigh everything that we can and look at. And that all of you and those that are not here have an opportunity to speak up. So that's why we want to really try to start talking about a date for the public forum, so people feel that they know when they can speak. And again, there's public comments at every meeting, so thank you. Any other public comments at this time? Okay. Then we'll move on to the Manning School Playground Committee presentation. Mr. Sullivan. And just as you're making your way up here, I know that some people probably think this is a completely crazy thing to even be talking about while we're talking about budget cuts. And the one thing that I think we should talk about again, which is what we talked about when Miller School was going through the same process, that there are different pots of money, and the pot of money that we're talking about on and is a different pot of money. This is an education fund that we're talking about here, that the big cuts need to be made from. So I think Dan eloquently said it a few meetings ago that if people start seeing jackhammers on the grounds, it's not the same. That's not because
It's not necessarily the same conversation.
Yeah. So, are you ready?
Yes, thank you. Thank you to the board for allowing Manning PTO some time in tonight's special meeting here to talk about the concerns and the ideas that we have with our playground. As proud parents of Manning and the district, we're here tonight to present these proposed changes with the understanding that the money for this project are indeed, just what Marie said, special stimulus money funds that, if approved, are only for the building upgrades to make our school more accessible, safer, and a better environment for all, not only in the physical building, but also in the outside activities as well. So I have passed around some pictures, and I've been told that, that this will also show most people sort of the existing conditions of the Manning Playground. What you're looking at right here, these two pictures here are showing the delamination of what's happening to our poured-in-place flooring. This top picture here, and also this picture here, you can see we've got some delamination that's happening. So the poured-in-place flooring, we've mentioned before, is in need of some repair. And so, again, these pictures sort of highlight that. It's sort of hard to understand that unless you go out there and take a look at it. So that's why we brought these pictures. The second two pictures that I wanted to show you, these pictures here show the location of the ramp. We'll talk about the ramp in a little bit, but again, I wanted to show you the conditions of that. So you had a point of reference as we go through here. Just another picture. And then the last two pictures that I have included here with the board. These pictures here show the current state, if you will, of the rubber shredded tires, if you will, that were, as I understand, were a donation from the Illinois prisons, is where this rubber mulch ended up coming from, is what I was told. But you can see the conditions of that as well, and you can see the bleed through. That wood piece that you see right there is the fence, so you can see the bleed through that happens from that. Kevin Driscoll is here from New Toys. I've asked him to join me up here so that he can point out his equipment as I read through. We're presenting two options basically for the playground. Option one is a good option, and option two is a better option, if you will. So I'll read through some of the pieces that we're talking about. Again, option one features some new pieces to the equipment that will be added to our existing large play set. The first piece that we have is called a summit climbing wall, which is this green piece here. This gives another way up for kids to be able to enter into this slide area. Right now, where we're adding these panels right now are all closed areas. So where we're adding access, there currently is none. So the access to the ramp right now is basically through the rest of the play set.
Excuse me, can I interrupt you for a second? Do you want to use my packet so that you can put the picture?
Oh, I have it here.
Yeah,
Should I put it up on there as well?
yeah, that would be helpful, so the people at home can see what you're talking about.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you. The second item we have is a vertical ascent wall, which is on the other side. And again, this is another access point to gain access to the slide. We also have a 24-inch deck ladder. We have a vertical ladder. We have a driver panel. Just up there, thank you. And then we also have a music area that New Toys has created for us up here. We have a bongo drum panel that's been added. We have a ring a bell, some chimes, and a storefront panel. Option one upgrades us to 10 play structure components that are accessible via transfer. As we talked before, and when I've addressed the board before about the concerns with ADA, the minimum requirement is 8. This gives us 10. We currently have 3. Option one is $6,857 in product. We have asked, we've gone ahead and done some preliminary work, and we've asked Kenneth Company that if we were to try and pull this together in the same time that Miller is getting their new play set, if they would give us some kind of reduction in rate, being that they're already sort of in the neighborhood, they've got assets already here, and if they could, give us some discounted pricing, and they did do that. Miller has offered us a rate of $2,325 to install these new pieces on our play set. Again, that's a generous rate that they've given us to add these new pieces to our current play set. Moving on to option two. Option two let me switch the slide for you. Option two has all the same popular and child favorite pieces as option one, but it also adds a couple of other elements. It adds a new ramp. It's right here, and an enlarged platform at the top of the slide deck to give us a minimum of 5-foot turnaround clearance for a wheelchair. So once we get up the ramp, they have a way to be able to turn around up there. We relocate the old ramp to where the Cladder Bridge was, and that gives us improved access to other areas. So we currently have a Cladder Bridge right now, and for those of you that don't know, a Cladder Bridge is one of those bridges when you walk on it sort of moves under your feet. That is eliminated in the new plan. What we're actually going to do is take the ramp that currently is going up the place to get up the play set, and we're going to relocate it to the middle here so that now we have a solid structure to be able to get across from one space to the next. It's just a safer way to get through there. Let's see, we relocate a piece of the roof, which is over now. We're going to relocate that over to the slides. You can see it was here, and now it gets relocated to over here. And what this does is it opens up the decks at the top of the ramp there. So again, a person in a wheelchair or other has a little bit more room up in that platform once they get up there that they could transfer and actually go down the slide. Option 2 takes us to 10 play structure components that are now accessible via ramp and 10 play structure that make it accessible via transfer. So now we have 10 pieces up here that they can get to by our ramp and also 10 that they can transfer on. Option 2 obviously is more money. Option 2 is $14,116 in product. And again, we've negotiated some pricing with Kenneth Company. If we were to coincide this with Miller's new playground installation, Kenneth has offered us a discounted rate of $3,940 to install these new pieces. So it's a little bit more in the labor, quite a bit more in product. So we're getting, again, I'm a contractor, so it's a good bang for your buck, if you will. Okay. Moving on to the grounds, change the slide for you. Okay, now that we've created this great place for endless play and release for our children, we need to address on how every student can get up there. The current ramp that we have is doesn't meet the current grade requirement for ADA. The current grade is at 6.2%. What we're proposing is to remove the existing asphalt ramp and redo that in a concrete ramp. I'm sorry, I don't have that slide. But it would actually, in a sense, be redone. So actually what will happen is it will be lengthened this way and it will actually come down this way. When we add more slope, obviously that takes up more space. So included in our grounds work, we need to remove this and extend the ramp to get it to the 5% grade and lengthen it at the same time. That will also have a couple of rest areas in the middle so that there is an opportunity for someone to stop if needed. The poured-in-place rubber material, we've gotten an estimate, and what we're looking at there, again, if you refer back to your pictures, what they're actually going to do with that is we've got a proposal to cut 12 inches all around the rubber material and repair all of that, so pour all new rubber in there, and then also repair all the areas that are delaminated and sort of freshen the whole thing up so that it sort of stops its deterioration and holds us over. By cutting it, this is key to making sure that we have long life product out of what goes in. The way that it was put in originally, apparently that's sort of why it's delaminated, is because it was just sort of rolled over on top of the asphalt, if you will. So the idea here is they're going to cut a nice clean edge, put some new product down there so we have good adhesion to both. The current rubber mulch that is in the playset area now will be removed as much as needed, and the ground will then be covered with a liner. A new, better mulch will be sprayed over the entire area, meeting the fall requirements, I believe, which are 10 inches. We currently have about 2 inches of rubber mulch in areas. So again, this is a standard playground mulch. It's made by a FIBAR, they call it a FIBAR mulch, which meets all the necessary fall arrest requirements and accessibility without the current problems that we have with the rubber/shredded tires. So the cost for the grounds work breakdown is such. The ramp, we're estimating the ramp to cost about $2,000. That includes the excavation and the removal of the old ramp. We're estimating about $3,000 in the concrete work to pour that new ramp, again, to get our kids up to the play structure at that 5% grade. So total, in the excavation and the new concrete, we're talking about $5,000. The poured-in-place material, we're looking at, our estimate is for $1,350 to cut and re-pour the new mulch, and then about $200 in repairs. We've got about $1,550 there. The mulch, $2,000 to remove the old, $500 in dumpsters, and $5,000 for the new mulch and the new filter. We've got $1,000 built in just for miscellaneous landscaping. Again, when we regrade, there's going to need to be some new grass put down there. Anyway, total for the grounds, we've got $14,050. Now, Manning is very, very fortunate to have the actual superintendent of the Westmont Park District as a Manning parent. He's been very active with us in helping us put all these numbers together. He's built many playgrounds with Westmont Park District. He was able to help us in securing a donation from the Westmont Park District of $4,000 in labor, management, and equipment to handle the grounds work that needs to be done. So that would cover the removal of the old, the regrading of the ramp, everything about that. There would be a separate concrete subcontractor that we brought in to frame and pour and do all the necessary concrete work, but they would take care of all the prep work. They'll also take care of all the work that needs to be done as it relates to removing the mulch. And Bob, who we're talking about here, Bob Fleck, who's the Manning parent, he will also be the person who will be supervising all of these efforts. So again, we feel very lucky to have him as a Manning parent and volunteering his time with us. So in closing, the Manning Playground volunteers have worked very hard to put this project together in a responsible way. We looked at how we could improve the overall experience, safety, and accessibility in a cost-effective way without tearing everything out from what we have and starting from scratch. Our first meeting, our focus has been on 1, the safety of our kids, 2, making sure that all the kids have the same opportunities, and 3, keeping our costs down. The easy thing to do on this project would have been to tear the whole thing out and start all over and meet all these requirements, but we chose to go a different path. So we looked at how we could remodel our space, add some new equipment to enhance what we have, and do it in such a way that will benefit the children for years to come, whatever their needs are. We have negotiated some discounted pricing, and we've sought and acquired some substantial donations to lower the overall cost. It would be our recommendation, the PTO's recommendation, that the board strongly consider option number 2. We feel with the enlarged decks, the included ramp, and the other features that it will truly give every child the same experience, no matter how they get from the bongo drums to the slides, they can get there. Last thing just to add, again, just thanks to the efforts of the executive board of the PTO, this year they've been able to between generous donations from families and local businesses, the PTO fundraising has been very good this year. We are willing to put forth a portion of our funds toward this playground effort if the board is not able to fund this important project. However, with that said, our fundraising has been focused this year on the educational needs and the inside classroom activities. They've been raising funds all year for new smart boards. As you may or may not know, Miller is getting, I'm not sure how many new smart boards, but Manning is not. So they've been trying to raise some funds to make sure that at least all of the grade levels have smart boards in each grade level, starting, I believe they're starting with 2nd grade or 3rd grade. There are some 3rd grade classes that have smart boards, others that don't. So these are $3,800 smart boards that they're looking at investing in. So that's where their fundraising effort has been this year. And again, so we would prefer not to use our funds if the district can find the money to, from the stimulus or other to fund this project. So I have, so just in general, just a quick overview. You have option 1, total $9,182. Option 2, $18,056, and then your grounds work of $10,050.
So, Jim?
Yes, ma'am.
The PTO has not allocated or budgeted any funds for playground renovation then at this point?
Not just time.
Okay.
And do I understand there is a child at Manning right now that is in a wheelchair?
There's currently a child in a wheelchair who is in early childhood development and will be going into kindergarten next year.
Okay. I guess, my first thought was I appreciate the work to preserve what you have, since the work that was looked at notices that this equipment is still available and around. So that is, I think, thank you for that.
Yeah, no, it's a huge help. They made a wise investment the first time.
Yeah. I guess, from my perspective, I think I like the piece where you're really talking about in that option 2, where you can have the wheelchair accessible and removing, as we call them the shaky bridge or whatever, what do you call it? So and I guess I would also say thank you to the Park District for stepping up. I don't know if Bob's here tonight, but.
Yeah, it was a big surprise to us when Bob had told us that, and greatly appreciate it. Again, a huge asset to us. I mean, really, in pulling all this together. He's not here tonight. I wish he were, but again, he's been a huge help in pulling all this together. These are all things that he does for a living, and again, I reiterated with him today before our meeting. I said, you know, I just want to make sure before I commit that you indeed are going to manage this whole project also, not only, you know, because again, on the Miller project, Kenneth Company is being hired also not only to install all this equipment, but also they're going to general contract the whole thing. You know, there's grounds work that needs to be done, all that kind of stuff, where fortunately, again, we have a manning parent who's going to oversee all the management of this, and again, it's what he does for a living, so, and he works for Westmont, so.
That was I mean, and by way of background, that was a fairly, you know, interesting conversation because the Miller folks did in fact offer to do and donate all that work.
Yeah.
And so, you know, the donation of work is an insurance and liability issue. Ultimately, on the Miller decision, we decided that the cost of having Kenneth Company be the GC, you know, was effectively insurance against future, you know, issues that may arise as a result of them not having done the work fully. So, you know, that was, and so as a result, you know, I mean, I think that's going to be a conversation that we have to tackle at some point as well. With respect to the funding, you know, I mean, I think a couple things. The Miller effort, you know, had a substantial PTO and community investment. It's a little school, but they allocated half of their treasury up front to that project. In addition to that, they effectively matched that in money raising for equipment that they value engineered out, and then subsequently said, you know, but we would really like to have it in. So they actually went out and spoke to parents and others to raise those funds to make up the differential. I think the notion of a co-investment, if you will, a side-by-side investment, not just in time and effort, but in terms of dollars. Even the kids had a big fundraiser at Miller called Pennies for the Playground, and their goal was to raise $500, and a parent agreed to match that dollar for dollar, and so it was a very successful and I think a very exciting process for the kids, for the families, and for the PTO. So I'll encourage, I would like to encourage you to go back and visit with the PTO about an economic and a dollar co-invest in this project. Not, you know, and Maureen, we can talk about whether or not there's stimulus funds available, or we can allocate other sort of working capital, but or if there's capital bond money that subsequently come through, we can talk about those things. But I would encourage the PTO to seriously consider a real economic investment as well, and just within the community as well as the PTO. Even if it's just a pure money raiser, like that you've got dollars that you want to allocate to smart boards within the PTO, that's great. But consider a pure money raiser to this new equipment and to the new playground. Again, to me, it's a huge opportunity. It's a huge opportunity to build cohesiveness in the community, excitement amongst the kids, real commitment within the parents in the community, because it just becomes so tangible when you talk about, we raised X thousand dollars to this project. So I'll encourage you to go back and talk to them and see if they could reconsider the notion of not providing funds to the project.
Jim, do you know if in your discussions with the executive board at the PTO, if that has been talked about in terms of,
It has.
I mean, I did hear what you talked about, and I, as a matter of fact, was at the last meeting when the discussion occurred in terms of using the smart boards. And so, to that extent, I think the coffers at the PTO would be, whatever the PTO chooses to do with that money.
Yeah. Yeah, it has. I think that, I think from our perspective, the goal is can this be paid for through the district? That was the goal A, because again, we have fundraised and we have sort of already sort of decided where we want to put that money. Again, it doesn't have to go into the smart boards. We feel like if we don't put it in the smart boards and we put it into the playground, it's still a good investment, but the smart boards are sort of what the teachers want and that kind of stuff. So there's a little bit more knowledge of and appreciation for the smart boards. There was talk about, well, let's take a look at sort of what Miller raised percentage-wise towards the project as it relates to how much this project is, and see if we could at least come up with those sort of funds and see if that makes some sense.
Yeah,
also.
well, except that the project there was substantially larger because in a pea gravel playground, you can't get anybody out there.
Yeah.
You just can't get anybody out there. So it's a little bit different, but and without setting any targets, give it some. I'd ask the executive board at Manning and the PTO to seriously consider it, to very seriously consider it.
Again, I agree. I don't think it's a bad idea, but.
Jim, what I was thinking is the smart boards obviously were a goal of the PTO for this year, am I right?
Yes.
So they will probably be going into budget planning for next year shortly.
Yes.
And it might be a good time to start thinking about where they want to put their energies for next year. And so, maybe that's a possibility too, that the goal for the raising of the money isn't, at the end of this year, but for next year.
Can I ask, Maureen, can you discuss, I think the last thing I'd hate to see happen is, Miller versus Manning, because we only have 2 elementary schools in our district. In terms of what they've talked about with ADA compliance, is there, where do we stand in terms of any of the funds that are used for this?
IDEA era grant, the State Board of Ed approved purchasing the Miller Playground from that set of money. We haven't applied for this because this was the first time I saw numbers
Right.
Yesterday. So we haven't applied. My assumption would be that they might approve it as well, but if we do that, then something else gets pushed to the wayside.
Sure.
Nancy Battaglia has expressed the fact if we're going to cut a support staff technician, that some of the items that we had on the ERA grant originally, we might not want to do because there won't be a person here to support that. So that might be okay in the long run. In addition to the State Board of Ed approving that, SACID as the co-op also needs to approve it, and SACID is kind of wary about approving it if it's not 100% for special ed, like we keep drilling home here. If we could identify strictly the parts that were wheelchair related, I guess, and I was looking up some things as you were talking, so I wasn't listening to the whole thing. Specifically, which costs would be wheelchair related, I don't see that the state board would refute that, especially since they've already approved the Miller Playground.
Right.
Since the Miller Playground was approved through the grant, though, that did free up the money in this current year's budget to pay for this alternatively. And I want to point out two other things. You mentioned that you were looking for smart boards for Manning. Miller's going to get 6 of them through a different funding from the ERA, and the cost of those was going to be about $1,800 a piece. So I'm not sure if your quotes that you're getting on the smart boards are maybe the best quotes that we could get, or if you're looking at some super board that I'm not aware of. And I again, I'd hate to get into that Manning versus Miller thing, and Manning gets something that's 10 times better than Miller.
We're not.
So I just want to point that out.
Thank you.
The other thing is, Marie and I, we talked about this a little bit, about the need to perhaps bid this.
Right.
Especially if we're going to Kenneth Company specifically, who's already been awarded a bid, and if we're looking to do it in the same time frame, which I think is a great idea, they'll probably end up giving us the best price anyway. But I think if you don't bid it, then you're looking at bid rigging, which is illegal.
Right.
It would basically increase the scope of the bid. So either we go talk to the attorney about whether or not they think that that's okay to do, or we bid the whole project just like we did Miller. Because some of these costs, and, Jim and I haven't had the chance to sit down and talk about it, but some of these costs, I don't know where they came from. Are these going to be all separate contractors? We can have 20 different people out there, or we can just do it just like we did Miller and have Kenneth handle the whole thing.
And, yeah, thank you, and I wanted to, because you and I did talk about that when we were asked to put this on the agenda, because, again, I think if there's, and I thank you for that piece about the ADA compliant piece, because I can't imagine that anybody would think that there's certain equipment that no one else can go on, and I'm sure that's not happening at other schools,
Right.
and so
It's hard to say, just the wheelchair-bound kid would go on this and nobody else would ever touch it. I mean,
Right.
it's unrealistic.
Right.
But people are being very cautious as to how they spend their.
Well, and didn't, if I remember correctly, didn't part of the Compass Learning funds come from that same era
Yeah.
thing?
Yeah.
And
Part of it also came from Title I, too.
yeah, okay. So to that extent, I think, I'm imagining the PTO Executive Board would probably agree to do fundraising, because I think,
Well, so
all
next
the-
steps, I think next steps, as a practical matter, would be
Yeah.
to, codify a scope of work.
And I'm sure Kevin could help with that. 'Cause
Yep.
he's-
Codify a scope of work, put it out to bid. In the meantime, that will give the Manning folks an opportunity to talk a little bit more about an economic commitment to the project as well. At that point, we can revisit the topic with bids in hand and commitments that, or goals from the PTO as well. Does
Yeah,
that make sense?
That makes sense.
Yeah?
Yeah, that's fine. Obviously, we're going to be way past the spring break, just so everybody knows.
Oh, yeah.
We'll be way
Well,
past the spring break.
I mean, I guess,
I'm sorry, way past the spring break in
Spring
terms of?
break, as in, everybody wanted Miller project to be done on spring break.
No, we're not, because
Together, yeah.
I don't think we're not starting Miller until June.
June
are we?
1st, yeah.
Yeah.
was told.
I just want
So-
to make sure that's
Yeah.
out there.
and I think is that
Yeah,
your
June 1st
committee?
is what we were told also, is
Yeah,
when Miller
okay.
was starting.
Okay, so that's good.
Yeah, yeah. So, it seems like there's enough time to order materials and that kind of stuff for this as well, by June 1st, I think.
All right, well, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Maureen. And to the rest of the committee. Okay. The next item on the agenda is cost containment and budget issues.
Sure. If you take a look at the two spreadsheets that you have today, at the March 9th meeting, we were asked to go back and articulate what would necessarily have to be cut in order to get the district through the end of the 2013 school year as opposed to the 2015 school year. And so those numbers are articulated without, assuming GSA remains the same and that we still get the same level of state funding that we got last year, which is not at all a viable concern. Just to take a look at the governor's budget, he basically was articulating a 17% decrease in state funding for schools. Exactly how that 17% will fall out is yet to be determined, but his budget recommends a lower foundation level, which ties to general state aid. He's actually asking the state aid, the foundation level be reduced about $5,600 from the $6,100 it is now. He actually does eliminate the flat grant districts. The flat grant general state aid, which saves about $21 million. As we've articulated here a couple of times, that there's the talk that the alternative grant and the flat grant could both be gone. Clearly, the elimination of the flat grant doesn't bode well in that direction, though Exactly whether or not that will happen is still up in the air. There has even been some talk, Representatives Patty Belloc and Sandy Pihos, who represent us, and then Downers Grove to our west, met along with Chris Cook, the state superintendent, on Monday. And there was even some discussion at the state capitol about a 10% reduction in our state funding for this year. Now, it appears that's not going to go anywhere at this point because of the obligations that are out there, but some things, for instance, like the current technical education grants that tie to the Carl Perkins federal money, you know, the tech academies who deliver that money, they haven't gotten a check since October for that. And so what Chris Cook said was that right now, the comptroller's office has $853 million in education vouchers that they haven't paid. And that, you know, their priority from the State Board of Ed is to pay for general state aid and mandated categoricals. And the next general state aid payments are due to be vouchered very shortly. So we're going to be at more than $1 billion behind in funding, in bills that, you know, the state board has already said, please pay. So there's a very strong likelihood that we are not going to get all of this year's state funding, and almost certainly there's going to be some significant cut to next year's state funding. All right, so though that is there for comparative purposes, it's not really a very good planning tool to use the assumption that keeps general state aid the same. All right. And then the other document shows, again, for planning purposes, that we would lose alternative grant general state aid, which may or may not happen. It will clearly be reduced, and some level of mandated categoricals would also be reduced. Right now, the big push would be to reduce our special ed reimbursements. That's what the state appears to be looking at in mandated categoricals. So if option A is taken, for instance, and we have to cut about $900,000 out of the budget, if you did everything that was on the list one as it was modified at the March 9th board meeting, that's about $600,000, and then other enrollment savings and some increase in the elementary class size and all of the revenue enhancements that have been articulated, we'd be about $38,000 to the good. Does that make sense? Okay. And then again, the two lists there, potential budget cuts list one, are the items that were originally.
Could I ask a question? Going back to that option A column?
Yes.
Now there is a FTE, so under option A. So if we increase class size to 28 for K through 2 and 30 for 3 through 5, that eliminates one teacher?
Correct. That's
correct?
one class. Effectively, only one classroom is eliminated at that point. You have one class that would have otherwise been split at 28 students that's now going to be split at 30 students. So you'll have one class of 29 students as opposed to one of 14 and one of 15.
Is that at Miller?
Yes.
Okay. So that's what that.
And again, that's based on.
That's that column there now.
Correct.
That's there.
That's
Okay.
based on this year's enrollment. Now, there might not be any savings if enrollment goes up. As more students choose not to go to public school or private schools, there's always the possibility that there wouldn't actually be that savings.
So as we go down that list, that next one, if option B was chosen, then in that column, that's 3.
Basically, yes.
Okay.
We have 3 classes that go to 30 if you do that for all grades, K-5.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. And again, the lists, the first list there, all of the items that were originally identified as potential cuts, coming up to about $600,000, including some things that were moved from the second list to the first list and vice versa at the March 9th meeting. And then at the bottom of, and then the next page there are the other items that had been articulated as potential cuts as well. And again, a number of documents from PMA reworking the numbers basically to show all the changes that were made, assumption-wise at least,
So,
It's the last meeting.
and a couple things on the PMA model.
Dan, which one are you looking at?
What's that?
Are you looking at the one?
Well,
that
yeah,
came
let's
via
just, the
email, or-
one that's, the March 16th one. It's kind of a
Yeah.
interesting presentation in the sense that, and
Okay, page 16 from the March 16th one.
March 16th, yeah. Now I can't find
Page one.
my model.
There's no 6.
No,
No, there's not.
no.
There's a.
That's what's,
up to
oh, that's his
14.
February one
Yeah,
in
that's
front of him.
February in front, and then
So
I
which do you want?
I need
You want this one?
my notes on it, though.
I
Here's
can't help you with your notes. Don't have them. He's on page 13,
yeah.
by the way, from PMA.
So on PMA, page 13, if we look at fiscal year 2011, again, fiscal year 2010, which is this current school year,
Page 13?
page 13, yes.
Today's presentation.
Today's presentation, March 16th, down at the bottom. So today, this budget has a, $810,000 negative, offset by $241,000 of a transfer, so a $568,000 negative for this current school year. So inclusive of the option A stuff that we just talked about, which is $600,000 from list one, the 150, the 67, and the 120 in revenue enhancements, rolls into the fiscal year 2011 projection. And that produces a budget next year of approximately an operating loss of $1.1 million. So even with all this stuff, we lose, based on all of the assumptions that are outlined in that model, $1.1 million. I'm going to ask folks to flip in that March 16th model to page 14. Page 13 and 14 kind of work together here. Clearly, what Dr. Ball noted was that the $600,000, the option A that we just that we're looking at takes us out to 2013, and by 2013 we mean on that bottom line it says that at May 31st we will have approximately $275,000 of operating cash to make payroll with after we make payroll in May. So that's our low point balance for the school year. And at that point then, we're the next year out of dough. So there's other things that we clearly need to do between here and there if all we do is this option A that we talk about. So I guess what I'd like to talk about is if we're okay with this list one as a 2013 option, or if we want to tweak it at all, based on some of the feedback we've gotten from other folks and from the WTA. And then secondly, what I'd like to do is construct a best guess at trying to get to 2014, and a strategy for trying to get to 2014. So at that point, we can, in April, present to the community and others, all of our constituents, hey, look, here's what we're looking at presently as a strategy, with the caveat being that there's a long conversation yet to be had, because, and I'll just say it out loud, I mean, we have a labor contract that comes up this year that's going to determine a lot about our future. And once we know the outcomes to that, sometime in the next 2 to 3 years, we have to figure out how to get a balanced budget again. And if that balanced budget isn't going to come by way of revenue, and we get finding $1 million in revenue is going to be next to impossible. It's going to have to come from programs. So I guess that's what I'd like to do tonight, is just make sure we're okay with this whole list one and the 2013 option, and then try to construct a 2014 option. Does that make sense? Okay.
I guess the question is, and I'm kind of just thinking this out loud, what you're saying is just on the table would be these, but we haven't really made any
No,
assumptions.
this is for presentation to the
For
community,
presentations,
like,
yes,
hey, look,
okay.
this is what we need to do to get to 2013.
Right.
And we lose $1 million next year at that rate, and we lose $1.3 million the year after that, and $1.4 million the year after that. By the way, this model, March 16th, does not include the notion of grade level centers, you know, for either next year or even 2012 and beyond.
No.
So I think, you know, I'll just say out loud that that's a conversation clearly that we need to have as well in terms of, you know, what that means and how that economically can impact us, you know, and save some money that way.
It's really option A. I mean, that's
Yeah.
what you asked me to work out. So it's really just the 28, class sizes of 28 for K2 and 30 for 3-5. We didn't
So-
even go to 30 for K5. So it's really the one FTE that we're talking about.
So I have a question. We've got the swimming pool thing on the second list, and there was an email about that and some questions about that.
There was, which
Yeah.
generated more questions.
Yeah, I
So
know,
that's
I
why
know.
it was not responded to.
I understand.
so-
Can we, can we charge for open swim, and does it make it?
We do.
We do?
We do.
So we.
Yeah, I'm trying
More.
to break down all of that in response to that email, and I need Steve Carr's help with it. Just emailed him at about 4 o'clock, so he doesn't even realize it yet.
Okay. So, because that's an interesting piece, if we can turn that from, just kind of shutting it down to something that's a revenue producer.
Absolutely.
Yeah. The only other things I had in terms of just observations about list one as they stand, list the second list, and then sort of integrating some of the comments that the WTA offered, is personally, I'd be okay with the notion of from list one, we left in field trip transportation costs borne by parents. The WTA made the point that those are educational experiences that they're concerned that kids may not get the benefit of if they have to truly pay for those. So I'd be inclined to move those to the second list for the time being and incorporate into the front list in order to offset it. The CAC meetings, eliminating CAC meetings during the day, again, something that the WTA indicated that they were more comfortable with than eliminating the field trips. So it's 4268 from the second list, and then sadly, as much as I hate to move this up front, but Panther Prince newsletter gets us to sort of $7,000 to make up the difference in the transportation costs.
We did get an email about, with a suggestion of putting that online.
Yeah.
So instead of eliminating it completely, that's a possibility. Just thought I'd put that
So-
out there since somebody sent
So
it.
I'll throw those out there.
Understand the big cost there isn't newsprint. The big cost there obviously is the stipend for the sponsor.
Well, and I guess if you look at, like, the information, like, the list before, in terms of support staff cuts, had eliminate one secretary at Miller, and that was $31,000. Now,
I should have
this,
changed
It's
the
half.
wording to
Yeah.
say reduce.
Yeah.
That's not a full elimination. That, you asked me to move that to
Half-time
halftime. so-
secretary,
Yeah.
which is the discussion we had.
so I guess, Dan, I like where you're saying, but I guess it's hard to do this without working, we've got all these different lists in front of us, we've got this list and the second list, and yet I think there's still some questions on the first one in terms of, so if now, you've now added a person, and so instead of eliminating one person, you're eliminating half. Is that right? That's why the difference in the
Yeah.
numbers? Okay.
Yes.
So how does that play out then, in terms of,
Well, we would have 1.5 secretaries at Miller.
I get that. I'm just saying, like, in some of these things, how does that,
Because we went down the list last time. I mean,
Right.
are there things we want to talk about in terms of what it means in each of these line items? I mean,
Well, like, for instance,
as much as I realize there's an audience and everything, let's just make
Right.
this a working meeting.
yeah, that's fine. I mean, I'm just trying to figure out, because I don't think, we didn't all weigh in on each item. We just kind of, back and forth. Like, for instance, I know Joel mentioned some things about summer school programming and asked for some background that we got, and so it's just kind of hanging there still. So that's what
That's a
I'm.
point. I mean, because Maureen
There's other
sent out
things.
an email
Right.
on that stuff, right?
With answers to all
Right,
the questions
answering
that
the-
I had.
Right.
That had been
Save
asked.
one of the questions regarding the seasonal grounds position. It's not possible to outsource.
Okay, so,
And that position is currently empty.
It's currently empty.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah, we don't have to fill it, but
Right.
we can't outsource it,
Okay.
because we'd have to have agreement from the labor union that covers that position, and that's not going to be forthcoming.
Okay.
just bear with, when you say it's not going to be forthcoming, that we know that.
That means the union said, no, you cannot outsource it.
So
And they have that right.
We made
Okay.
we made contact with
Yes, we
them?
did. And, I mean, they're very upfront about it. I mean, if you start to outsource one position, from the union's point of view, then what's
Okay,
next?
so even though we've been having difficulty filling the position, they will not agree to outsource it. So what is their suggestion for filling it?
I didn't ask for that. Didn't ask for that. And I'll be truthful, I think part of the reason we've had trouble filling it is because of Obama's unemployment benefits were extended for so long that a lot of people didn't want to take it for what it was paying because it would mess with their unemployment. So I'm almost wondering if at this point, a lot of people will have run out of unemployment and the job might be more attractive. I don't know. I mean, it
And
is
that's
kind
been the
of,
problem in the past, is that people who've taken it have been laid off from another position for the most part. Simply with the other grounds position that we have that has been being filled with a temporary employee for a while. And now our courier position's filled with a temporary employee. Once they get to the point where they work too much to get their unemployment benefit, they've left us. So,
and some people who aren't familiar with schools don't realize that if it's an IMRF eligible position, it's not an option to pay IMRF. You have to pay it.
Right.
So it is an IMRF eligible position. So we did have one gentleman who took the job, found out it was, and quit a couple weeks later. So,
Realized that,
we've had a
yeah.
couple different issues with filling the job. I'm hoping that, sounds wrong, I'm not hoping that people run out of unemployment, but I'm hoping that some people might be at the end of that 99 weeks and maybe we'll be able to fill it. Whether or not we do is entirely your decision, so.
Okay, well, we may have to revisit that again if we continue to have difficulty filling the position because we cannot keep those grounds not taken care of
Right.
simply because we're having difficulty filling the position. And we shouldn't have to make it a full-time position because we only have a limited time that it needs to be taken care of.
Right.
And what is the time frame that this position?
We usually fill it, it's March, right, Mike? Yeah, March 1st until October 31st?
yes.
Okay, did you want to talk about,
Well, the only thing I have, that I really have circled on this list is summer school, because I think that really is important to a lot of families who feel their kids could use the extra assistance over the summer. And I guess there was some conversation last week about what the purpose of summer school was, whether it was really to help kids who were struggling, but from my personal experience, I know that's how it's been used. And when a teacher has recommended that to me for my student or my child, they have talked about it in that regard, that, this would be beneficial for them over the summer to get a little extra help to bring their reading level up or whatever. So I think, this is kind of a programming thing. I don't view it as just a luxury item. I view it as something we do to keep kids up to speed over the summer so they don't lose ground.
Could we reduce the, could we reduce the offerings and make them just those move-up
Media.
classes? Or, what are they called? Step up or?
Step-
Forgot what they're called.
There
When
were-
the children are moving
Yeah.
into the next grade.
Right.
And not have.
There was crafty art
Like a
and
booster or
physical ed fun, I think. Were those the other two options? last summer?
Every year, we offer a number of other options. Effectively, the
two.
Jump Start courses are the only ones that really fill. Now, again, and I think I spoke to this last time, if you combine those Jump Start courses into, a kindergarten, first grade cohort and a second, third grade group, if you put multiple age students in there, they're going to obviously have less value, because they're not going to be specifically dealing with that curriculum. And so the issue becomes, there's not that much savings, and so the cost benefit isn't there from a standpoint that they're much less, valuable if you combine them. And so if you want to offer them, you can, but then that's the sort of the $9,000 cost, plus there's administrative overhead as far as you have to have somebody there,
I wonder.
to supervise them.
I wonder if we could talk about, maybe the high school putting together some kind of like a tutoring program, because I know, one-on-one tutoring is really advantageous. I can speak from experience on that with my own family members, but I think that tutoring or maybe some other opportunities that might be available in the community. We could maybe provide a list of resources for the parents whose children are struggling and are maybe looking for opportunities, to involve their students in during the summer, so that they don't, so that they have other options.
Yeah. I don't have my sheet in front of me, Maureen, but you said that some of those, the people that take up the summer offerings, some of those are waiver
Almost
as well?
half. Almost half.
Okay, almost half. So I think that kind of plays into then some of the stuff that, like, we were talking about last meeting, and why some of these items at the bottom were reduced in terms of, we had reduced support fee for waiver students. So if we eliminate the whole summer school programming, then we're in effect, that's that population.
I mean, if you make the summer, my understanding is, if you make the summer school offerings voluntary, I mean, teachers can recommend them. If you make them voluntary, you don't necessarily have to waive the fees.
Correct.
We have actually in the past, assigned kids to go to those classes.
Right.
And in that case, we feel you can't.
Well, you
tell-
can't.
You have to waive the fees because we're basically assigning them to the class. So if you make them voluntary, then I don't see personally why you couldn't require them to pay the fees.
You could. But the issue then becomes with the small numbers of kids you have, you're still going to have, a loss. You're never going to cover your costs.
Well, I think that's that balance, like a couple things that I know Linda brought up last time was in terms of not, in terms of the savings from the one list, we went from $1,500 on no longer waiving athletic, band, drama fees for waiver students. We cut that in half to $750. So my question would be, isn't that the same thing? There's that balance there between the two. Am I making, is this making
But
sense?
I think what Dr. Ball is saying is that by the time you pay to have the teachers come in and, whatever other operational costs there are for providing summer school, we're just not going to make enough money to cover the costs, so it's not cost effective to run the summer school program. Even if we, only cut the waiver fee rather, or reduce it, rather than do the the complete waiver. We're already running at a deficit, running the program.
Is busing included in the summer school?
What's that?
Busing, the bus? Because no, that is not.
That's an additional cost, or that's an additional savings? if
Because
you don't?
we are, kids are bused for summer school.
We get reimbursed for all of it. Well,
Thank you.
currently, we get reimbursed for a portion of it. Next year, a lesser portion because of Quinn's cuts.
Right.
If Quinn's cuts go
So,
through.
yeah, actually, there's potentially larger savings there.
Well, I do like Kathy's idea of kind of putting together a list of tutors, if we could, and trying to, help people get matched up. Because I do think with the stipends being removed and with so many teachers out of work, that there may be a lot more people looking to find work as tutors in the near future.
We could do that. There are really two caveats I'd want you to think about before you do that. One is that you want to if you put together a list of tutoring options, basically you'll want to say anybody who wants to be on it can be on it, from a standpoint that if you put together a list of recommended tutors, the district now has some liability for that. And the other issue is you want to give it out to everybody, because if you only give it to some people, then some people may assume that you're saying, well, you gave it to my child because you wanted my child to go there, and therefore, please pay for it.
I don't think that you would give it to everyone. I think that it would just be available
Like
to
on the
parents who are
website or
What I'm
interested.
saying is if you don't give it out to everybody, you run the risk that those parents could come back to you and say, well, since you gave it to, my child in a targeted way, you believe they need the tutoring and therefore you should provide it. The district should pay for it.
Well, then how about if you just make the list available on our website?
Well, again, we can do that. But again, then you want anybody who says, hey, I want to be on your list, you
Well,
want
and
to
I
put on
think
your list.
parents then have to do
Right.
due diligence in selecting a tutor. I mean, I think I've been in a situation before where someone's recommended and I have to figure out whether
Oh,
or
yeah.
not.
No, I just want to clarify that from a standpoint that some people will think, well, it's a list that's recommended by the district. It's simply a list that's available.
Right.
I think a list of tutors, there's a couple thoughts I have, is kids aren't going to benefit from the social and emotional support and the interactions with other students. That is an important part of attending school. And
Well,
I
then
think
we
you're going to
don't-
lose,
In addition to the list of tutors, we can provide a list of other resources. There's other programs out there that they could participate in. I can't think of any off the top of my head, but I'm sure that they're out there.
The Park District.
Yeah, the Park District has a lot of summer programs.
Park District, sure.
the other part that's missing and kind of was commented on by Mrs. Ferrugia when she did her report last year was kind of the continuity, from finishing up the school year to kind of keeping things going and then entering the next school year. She talks about getting some math materials to help staff target strategies and interventions that accommodate the individual needs of students that are not responding to Tier 1 coursework during the regular school year, and talks about using the MAP and Ames Web scores for targeting interventions for summer school. And so it's kind of a continuation of what they're already getting and then leading them to the next school year, that I think that component is going to be missing by trying to just put a tutor in place, or, recommending tutors, and it's...
I think we all probably agree with how valuable summer school is. We're in a very difficult situation here of trying to identify things that kind of we're forced to do without right now, because everything is going to affect students, and I think we have to think about which things affect the least amount of students the least amount of the time. And so I think that's kind of how we have to approach some of these things. Your arguments are all very valid, and I think we all appreciate them. And we have to just decide if this is something, because if this stays, something else goes. So when I look at the big picture, I try to think about the most kids most of the time when I'm thinking about what I can possibly consider as a cost containment.
So Joel, that's
So-
the challenge. Like
That's the
when I
challenge.
looked at the field trip things, if you take that off the front list, then I think if I'm going to advocate taking that off the front list, I think I got to look at the second list and find something to put on there to offset it. So if you're if you feel strongly about summer school staying in place, then I think we have an obligation to find the money.
Well, and I guess
Well, we
that,
don't have the grounds position filled, we have money allocated for that right now.
Yeah, but
What if you
I think-
half-timed that, then you'd pay for summer school and you'd still have a
Well, but if-
part-time, less,
But if we're having a hard time finding a full-time person to fill that seasonal position, we're going to have a more difficult time finding a part-time position. And, the issue is, the reason the board has it on the list is because there are safety issues involved in that.
Right. And part of the reason there are safety issues, I'm sorry, Steve, is that it is a seasonal position, and there's so much that has to happen in March to get everything ready, because it's not an all-year thing. I'm sorry, Steve.
and I guess some of that, some of those questions, and I'm not wanting to jump off of where you're saying, but Dan, I agree with what you're saying, but for instance, on like the first list here, I don't know, and maybe Maureen could tell me, are the WTA's recommendations at all in there, or is that?
Yes, they were involved in creating this list.
No, I'm talking about the presentation that we
No,
that
this
we
is
received.
specifically the direction Dan gave at the end of the last board.
Okay, I'm talking about a bigger picture in terms of like where we're going with this, because if all of this information is for us to discuss and talk about, then we're not making any decisions tonight. So these are still,
Yeah,
you know,
but
we're hearing
what we
from all
have to do
different.
is start to coalesce effectively a couple different propositions for the
Right.
community at large to consider and
Right.
give us feedback on.
Right.
Right? I need a proposition that gets me to 2013.
Right.
I need a proposition that gets me to 2014. And then I need to solicit some feedback on those two propositions. And then, you know, ultimately probably in May, we make decisions about what directions we go.
Right.
But at this point, we need to coalesce around the proposition.
And
And
let
I-
me just remind you from a time frame. You know, it is from a standpoint of if you want all of these options to remain possible options, everything that's on list 1, 2, anything else identified by the WTA potentially that wasn't on that list, though I really can't think of much that, I can't think of anything that's not on one of those lists. Then at the next board meeting, the board is going to be asked to, you know, provide reduction in force notices and non-renewal notices to staff, because if you don't do it, then there are some things that are clearly off the table, because if you don't give statutory notice, they're not options anymore. Does everybody understand that? All right.
But I guess like the question, and just, because we have on here, reduce, under support staff, reduce one Westmont Junior High secretary to part-time. And then on list 2, there is, where is that? The reduce Westmont High School secretarial staff, combined attendance and athletic secretaries. So, like, if you just take those two things, and again, these are words on a paper, but they're people, how do we decide what list that goes on?
Well,
In
I
terms
think-
of, you know, don't we have to get some information as to how that would play out in terms of if we reduce?
Well, I think administratively, we've chewed it over a million different ways.
I mean, you've already, I mean, the recommendations from list 1 and 2, as I think articulated at the last meeting, were the items that are in list 1, when the administrative staff met along with the representatives, all of the unions, those were the issues that, you know, when the original goal was keep the district solvent through cuts until 2015. Meaning we had made about $1.2 or $1.6 million in cuts. These are the things we need to do. If you take a look at the list from the WTA, basically their point was, that they didn't feel that you know, those drastic cuts should be made, and the board should look at alternative revenue sources before you make cuts to that level programmatically. And so what you see from list 1 is, generally speaking, the recommendations from the staff who work with these people every day and have to work in these offices that will have fewer people in them. And I think that, you know, the board needs to weigh you know, those opinions very strongly. I understand the desire to have significant public comment, but the people who work in those offices every day clearly have a pretty strong idea of what works there. I mean, one of the big issues when you look at the issue of cutting secretarial staff at Miller, Manning, the high school, or the junior high is that the high school doesn't have a central office space. And so, you know, making cuts there are much more difficult because you don't have people who can cover things and still provide the secretarial support to people in offices in other parts of the building. Whereas at the junior high and at Miller and Manning, they're all in a similar office space. And one of the reasons for making the recommendations for cutting the positions at Miller and the junior high is the enrollment in those two buildings is less than at Manning or at the high school.
Can we get the total number of enrollment at the schools for the next meeting?
Sure.
Just so we have that.
Can we go back to the summer school discussion and can we just talk about, I mean, it's either staying on the list or it's coming off the list. And so can we get a feel from everyone at the table here if it stays or goes? I mean, as a possible cut? This is what I'm sensing we should do, is just kind of move down the list and see if there's anything else that we can all agree on. Yes or no?
I think we kind of have to start moving in that direction. I think that's what Dan was alluding to with his last comments
What's that?
about
I'd like to proceed with that.
coalescing.
Yeah.
We have to be able to,
I mean, yeah, we know we need $600,000 to make it to 2013, plus the other stuff. You know, so I mean, the question is if we're gonna tweak, right? Let's tweak.
Yeah.
But then let's talk about how we get to 2014 as well. And actually, you know, in terms of that, to start thinking about that, let me have you go back to page 14, your model. Our low point balance in 2014 is $1.5 million. That's 4 years out on our projection period. So Maureen, I'm going to estimate that we have to find an additional $400,000, right?
Four to
To,
five, yeah.
Yeah, 4 or 5. And so we have to, in order to get to 2014, we're going to have to look at this second list and find about $400,000 more to put on the list. That said, one of the things we can do in terms of 2014 is talk about one of these grade level centers options. So for instance, if we looked at option E and look at the grade level center savings at class size at 30, save $305 a year. Now, on the margin, Steve and Maureen, correct me, you know, we're already saving 67 by going up to 2830.
Right.
So we actually would save, you know, if we did this, like if we suggested doing this in 2012, we would save 305 minus the 67, so call it
Correct.
235. 235 times 3 gets me to $700,000. So now I need $800,000 over 4 years, so I need about $200,000 more. Is that right?
Right. And the caveat with the grade level centers
I have a
is that
question.
right now,
Go ahead.
I think this is important for people to understand. Right now, Miller, for instance, and the reason they got smart boards is because they're a Title I school, right? And a certain piece of that stimulus fund is only to be used for Title I program. Therefore, we used it for the smart boards at Miller Manning. We couldn't buy them for them out of that same funding. Originally, we were told we could use the other piece of the federal stimulus, and then we were told we're not. If, right now, the threshold for Title I is 40% poverty, right? If we go to grade level centers, neither school meets that threshold. They're each in the 30s. Because Manning's about 25% and Miller's about 40%, 43% or something like that. And so we would lose our Title I funding. So though there's some savings, unless changes happen to the Title I process, or we can get somebody to give us a waiver and retain our funding, which doesn't seem in this current situation probable, because, you know, like the hold harmless dollars that are in there for special ed are all stripped out in the governor's budget. There's an offset to that, which we've just recently got, you know, Christy Civic and Maureen have just gotten an answer as far as that. So that's not worked into here, because again, we don't want to change the variables one more time, but the grade level center option does have real savings over time.
Yeah.
But there's an offset from a standpoint of Title I funding.
If you lose Title I funding.
Correct.
So, you know, part of that conversation over the course of the next year, because we're clearly not going to embrace that conversation, you know, this year.
right.
But part of that conversation over the course of the next year is, you know, sort of ironing out to the best of our ability whether, how and/or what would be the impact to our Title I funding in terms of going to grade level centers.
Right now, what we've been told, the answer we've been given in the last week is we would lose it.
We would lose it.
Now,
How
that doesn't mean that
how
would
much
happen.
that be?
196,000.
How much is it?
That's 196,000 this year.
Okay. Yeah, it was more and now it's dropped and it's
So it
fluctuated a
negates-
little bit. Now, one of the
So-
reasons it's
so-
fluctuated, and there's a caveat to that, is that right now, Title I funding is, we get it as a lump sum for the state, it's proportioned out. There are some districts right now, because of AYP, who simply don't take their Title I funding. Because if they don't take their Title I funding, they can never be on sort of the federal, strictures for not meeting AYP. When No Child Left Behind changes, and they go to a growth model, which is clearly going to happen, right? The first structure of that is out there. Our Title I money is going to go down anyway, because everybody's going to want their Title I money again when there's no punitive reason for not taking it.
Yeah.
Okay? So there's an impact, but the question is you're planning 3 or 4 years out. What the real number is, impact-wise, I have no idea.
So what you're telling me is I can't bank on the grade level centers, I gotta find $400,000 without it?
Yes, I think that's one way to say it.
Okay,
But I tried to explain the reason why.
okay.
I'm sorry, Kathy, you had a question?
Well, I was just wondering, in option B, when it shows that savings for the grade level center, does that mean this year, or does that mean like next school year?
Option B
It's option C, Kathy.
or option C?
Option C, I'm sorry.
Option C would be the saving based on this year's enrollment. Now, when we put these numbers together, I used enrollment from 2006 and 2010, just to give me, two numbers. There were a couple years, for instance, when the numbers just fell in such a way that going to grade level centers saved like 7 or 8 FTE. Generally, over the years, that's not the case. And those were sort of 2 average years where the kids sort of broke out normally. And you save by just straight out going to grade level centers, you see the FTE there, the line between sort of the description in option A to the left of option A says FTE. So for increasing those class sizes to 28 and 30, and Dan said this before, even though it says you're going up, in reality, only one classroom changes its number, right? Now, if you go to 30, 3 classrooms change. And then the same thing, if you went to grade level centers and took all the class sizes to 32, which is actually where they used to be before 2005, you save 7 FTE. And you're always, over time, you have more flexibility with grade level centers because all of your second graders are always in the same place. And you don't have the issues we sometimes have now with really large classes at one school and really small classes at the other. Right? So it's much more equitable across the district, but there are disadvantages to it as well.
What kind of costs are involved with the actual mechanics of the transition of something like that?
And one of the reasons that administratively have not recommended making a grade level change for this year no matter
Well,
what.
I wouldn't
Because
go
of,
for something like that this year anyway.
we've talked about having our playgrounds be ADA compliant, but our elementary schools are not ADA compliant. And so,
Because that would cost $1 bajillion.
well, a bajillion might be a little on the high side, but, clearly there are costs there, and we're really hoping at some point, though I don't think I'm going to hold my breath, that we'll get that capital construction board money, that 1.2 million, to do some of that work that the state promised us in 2002. Again, don't hold your breath.
Yes, don't hold your
But right now, because of where we have students placed, Manning would have to be the 3-5 building. I mean, I guess it wouldn't have to be, but logically, you would make Manning the 3-5 building because since it was once a junior high, it has separate music rooms, in an auditorium separate than the cafeteria, for instance. So you'd move your 3rd to 5th graders there. And otherwise than that, there's really not a lot of, there's some movement of staff around, theoretically, because you would move most of your primary teachers to Miller and your intermediate teachers, for the most part, to Manning. And that's really the only cost. So there's a cost similar to like when Southwest closed, there's a certain cost of just moving people, but there's no real large costs. There are probably, over time, some savings because you don't have to have things for both the primary and the elementary level, for instance. One of the big costs would be, to go back to Linda Hull's comments from the beginning of the night, talking about libraries, would be adjusting the libraries because you'd want to move all the primary books to one building and all the intermediate books to the other. So, that's really the biggest cost because everything else is pretty flexible and classroom dependent. I mean, there aren't huge costs associated with going to grade level centers. And there are clearly over time significant savings, which is why most districts of our size have grade level centers. I mean, Lyle went to grade level centers in the 70s, basically to save money.
But like you're saying, before we embark on that, that would
I was
really
just
take a whole.
curious
Yeah.
as to, you know,
The
how the
costs,
mechanics
yeah.
work and what costs are involved. And I'm sure that the people in the audience would
Right.
want to know that information as well.
Yeah.
And-
So
and
it's
just for-
not, we're not talking about this at all for next year, just to reiterate
And
that.
just for
Just so people
clarification, in case everybody doesn't, I had one parent ask me what a grade level center was. That would mean all of the district's kindergartners, for instance, go to one building. All of the first graders go to the one building, and generally you would split K2 and 3-5 with the physical facilities that we have.
Back to the Title I, I have a question. Is that based on population that number fluctuates?
It's based on your low-income population.
Just on that, just that specific number, not the
Well,
entire school?
It's based on a number of things. First, it's based on how much money the federal government chooses to appropriate each year. And then, you know, that's split up among districts in the state that apply for it. Now, Chicago gets just a chunk of it, you know, regardless sort of demographics, they get an X percentage. And then the rest of it is spread among the other 800 and some school districts. For those that apply, as I said, there are some districts that choose not to apply for Title I money because it's not worth sort of the red tape involved in getting it. And some years we've gotten some more money, partially because other districts, for whatever reason, didn't apply for it and it got redistributed.
So it's kind of divided upon, like 10 people apply, so it's divided between the 10, so to
Yes.
speak?
Based on whatever the federal, you know, appropriation is.
And what did you say the criteria for receiving Title I money was again? You told us
Right now,
last
we're being told the threshold is a school with more than 40% poverty. So, and that's identified as students on free or reduced lunch. Right, so Miller is right now the only school that is a Title I school.
And we think that that's going to, would change with grade level centers?
Well, if we went to grade level centers, the population would be distributed by the building they're in, not by where they originally, you know, which enrollment area they're in. And so Manning's number is about 25%, so the middle number becomes like 33%. And that wouldn't make the threshold for either building to obtain Title I funds.
What's the percentage now, did you say?
It's about 40-ish something at Miller,
Okay.
It's
and it's
48.
20, what is it now?
48 at Miller, 25 at Manning. They'd both be right about 31% if we went to grade level centers.
If you
Getting
also,
back to Kathy, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, Kathy brought something up and we never really addressed it. So if we're going to be able to move on from any of these things, should we go back to the summer school question, since it doesn't seem resolved? Do we
So
want to all say what we think and then move on, or?
Well, and to be honest, you have to make a decision about summer school very shortly.
Right.
You can't wait till April 27th, because we have to find teachers. We have to,
Right.
you know,
I understand.
I'll jump out there. I mean, summer school falls into the same category for me as Panther Prince. I hate it, but I think we have, you know, I think we have to cut it.
I'm with you on that.
I agree. I think, agree, this is a tough decision, but overall, I agree.
Saddens me, but I think it has a lot of value for a lot of kids, and I don't want to see it cut.
No, I agree that it has to be cut. As much as I don't like it, I think that it has to be.
Anything else in
I'm
this
going to
one we
abstain.
want
I didn't,
to dig into? Sorry.
I'm just going to abstain
Yeah,
on
sorry.
that, so.
I'm sorry.
I think we've made our decision.
Can I bring up something from the list?
Yeah,
Okay,
I have something too.
and this is something that we tabled last time, and I think we really have to kind of hash out, and that is the certified nurse position reduction. and hiring two RNs. There was conversation about how this would become a safety issue. And I wondered if, Diane, are you ready to speak about that at this time? Because you were the person who brought it up.
Part of it, I don't know that I can stay here, so if it starts to get into an area that I don't feel comfortable in a public venue, it gets a little bit specific.
Well, I guess my argument would be that two RNs who are very highly qualified and the position being filled full-time as it already is, would be definitely a way to cover our needs. There was some talk about continuity in terms of students, but the students are always moving through a building. And again, this is one of those things where I look at most of the students most of the time when I'm trying to make a decision, especially with this kind of ticket attached to it. So I don't know if anybody else has something to say, but I would really recommend moving this to list number 1.
I've actually thought about this, and I guess the thing that I am concerned about is as we're looking at all of these, as these numbers in this, I'm just wondering why this one position? Because we have a lot of other positions in the district that we're not looking at reducing to either 0.2 or eliminating, and yet this one, I would think there would be some union issues here too, because you're taking an employee who is paid at a certain level and now splitting up that job to 2 people. I wonder then why this one now and why we're pointing this out. This was brought to us last year too, because there's certainly other people in the district that are in the same position. And the last thing I'm saying at this point is to start adding people to the list.
Well,
But
there
that's
are
what-
already people on the first list, though, like the curriculum director is on the first list.
Right.
Could I
know.
recommend
I
that
don't agree
So
that we're
that's-
not looking at other
We're
positions.
talking about tech support people, custodians,
Yeah.
Right.
you know, food service people. From a certified standpoint, in this particular case, a certified nurse is paid on the teacher salary scale, all right? The RNs are paid hourly wages, right? Basically, a district needs a certified nurse for some very specific special ed issues, right? And you can sort of argue the scope of those, but let's say in the most significant scope we have 10 students who need the certified piece of the nurse, right? And I think, to be honest, that's much larger than in reality, what the reality is. RNs can provide all of those other services with the exception of that very small scope. Back to Linda's issue of most of the students most of the time. And in fact, currently, you know, the junior high school and the high school are served only by RNs, not by a certified nurse. And so, you know, when you look at that kind of savings, that's, you know, it's been identified a number of times, simply like the librarians have been put on the list as far as, you know, could you eliminate the certified librarians and replace them with aides? And you look at the fact, and Linda Houle articulated this again tonight, you know, the certified librarian has, you know, an instructional impact on every student in the building. A certified nurse doesn't necessarily have that direct impact on all of those students. Now, there are a few students which they have, you know, very significant impact on, and again, that's why the recommendation here would be, or the suggestion there is to reduce and keep that person effectively 1 day a week, so they could be involved in the necessary IEP meetings. But the rest of the work is being done by RNs. And it's just an economic issue. If you have, you know, if you can do the work much more cheaply in another direction, you know, as we're looking at making cuts and potentially cutting summer school and other things, you want to look for where you can make those cuts.
Well, I guess I would just say, I personally would like to see that position stay on list 2, especially since we have been, that's one of the suggestions that the WTA has brought to us. So I'm just saying, if you're asking to move it to list 1, I'm weighing in that I would like to leave it on list 2.
Well, let's talk about list 2 for a second, because, I mean, if it, in terms of list 2, in order to get to 2014, we need to find about half of these numbers, about half of this 878,000 to put on a list to show that we can make it to 2014, I
Right.
think, right?
Right.
So, and I'll, at some risk.
More than half. Yes.
Yeah, at some risk, I'll just throw out, if you want to, I've sort of ticked off some things that I think if we put them on a second list to get to 2014.
Dan, excuse me, I'd really like to finish this conversation
Okay.
about the certified nurse, if you don't mind, because
Okay.
we left it hanging last time, and I just want to make another
Well,
comment
and-
since we're talking.
Well, I think too that since it's
Kathy, can you
personnel-
talk up a little bit?
Yeah, since it's personnel related, I'm wondering if there's some issues about this particular item that need to be discussed and closed.
You clearly have that right.
Okay.
Okay,
Discuss it
all right,
in
that's
closed.
fine. But then we just related before Dan continues. When we're talking about cutting certified staff, and you look at the things on the first list that are all kind of coordination positions that keep our buildings in communication with each other and keep our curriculum in line and keep us moving forward in terms of progress with the academic offerings for our students. I can't believe that there's not more of an uproar about losing a curriculum director, losing department coordinators, losing all, potentially sharing principals. How is this work going to get done? I mean, we really, when we're talking about all of the students, most of the students, most of the time, and preserving academic programming and extracurriculars that add to the experience for students, and then we are focusing on these other things, I really have a hard time, coming to terms with that. Because these are the things that are going to make us, as Linda kind of expressed earlier regarding library and technology, these are the things that are holding everything together. This is the glue that makes us a unit district and makes us work as a unit district. And so far at this table, what I hear is it's okay to let all of that go. And I just think that's kind of interesting, and it's somewhat frightening to me,
I
actually.
think it's unfair to say that what you've heard is it's okay.
No one, I think, has said
Have you heard-
anything that's
have you heard
okay.
anyone say that?
In the sense that there hasn't been any argument against it.
Because we know what we have
It's
to,
an
we know what we
assumption.
have to do. And by the way, on this front page, I'm just trying to make sure, we haven't talked about sharing principles anywhere on the front page, right?
Right, I know,
Okay.
I know. But it's something that it has been brought up, and there's things that the WTA has
I mean,
brought up
because
that
that's
I
not
think
even, I don't think that's even on the second
I can't support
page.
either, even though it's been brought forth by the WTA.
No,
So-
you're talking about the principal
Yeah,
issue? Well, combining principles was brought forward by a staff member.
okay,
I think it would be unfair to say that the WTA would support that.
okay,
Let's not, just to be clear,
all right.
all right? Remember, anybody who suggested anything, it got on the list. So any suggestion, no matter how, sort of extreme, any suggestion came to the board, any single one.
Okay, then, my
Including
point
share
minus
elementary
the
principals.
sharing of principles still stands.
But I
Thank
think,
you for
know,
listening.
Linda, I think you bring up a good point, though, because I don't think any decisions have been made. And so
No,
to the
they haven't.
fact that you're saying that people aren't up in arms about the curriculum director being on the list, I think it's because, frankly, I think we're sitting here, we're having these discussions, and so that's why we're laying out the plan, that we're going to talk about it and talk about it. Because, again, if it's just on the list because somebody put it there, then we need to talk about how that will work. For instance, hire separate, department coordinator stipend, eliminate them. So what happens then if we do that? And so we haven't had any of those conversations
Well, I
yet. So
think I
don't
just started that conversation, actually, so that's kind of what I'm bringing up.
Right.
Okay, so I am talking about it, and no, I understand that no decisions have been made, but if we're talking about every other item on this list, I thought it would be okay if I brought up those items.
Yes, I'm not saying, I'm just saying, you're saying that people aren't up in arms, and I'd have to agree that.
Okay, so that's the question. If we eliminate the curriculum director,
Right.
how's that going to work?
Well, ultimately, you'll move back in the direction that we've been. You know, I mean, when I got here in 2005 and there was no position, each elementary school basically had a separate reading curriculum. You know, both, in reality and, everybody even had different reading series. So there wasn't even an attempt really to have everybody on the same page. In fact, the district had at one point approved a new series, and then each building sort of moved away from it.
Yeah, but isn't it unfair to say that at this point, if you eliminated that you would move back to that?
What I'm saying is, I think over time, you will lose the continuity, especially as you have
and again,
nobody.
it presumes that you over time never replace it. That over time you don't build other mechanisms to coordinate it. That over time you don't engage other teachers. That over time and to say that we're going back 5 years if we make this decision today is unfair, in my view.
I wonder.
We
I
watched
agree.
that happen. We used to have a
It's
curriculum
unfair
director.
to say it,
Right.
that
We
we're going
used
to,
to,
it's
and
going
we
to
got
happen
rid of
tomorrow.
it, and
It's
it fell
unfair.
apart.
Can I entertain?
Flat
the-
out unfair.
Can I
I agree, 100%.
Suggest the idea that we look at possibly reducing this to a part-time position then instead.
Right. Because, Marie, when you're asking about the kind of like the ripple effect of what happens with this, so Dan, to your comment about how it's not fair, if, we're losing support staff in terms of secretaries, the principals are going to be engaged somewhat more on that kind of stuff because they're in the office. Okay, if the principals are also supposed to take up curriculum coordination kinds of things. Everything spreads everybody thinner. There's not going to be the same kind of strength. So to say that we're going back, I don't think is unfair. I think it's one of the ripple effects. It just can't be done. People cannot do everything.
Well, only if you stay in that position, though, and only if you stay, having made the cut, that you never try to unwind it. And one of the
Saying, though,
conversations,
if we're
one of the
sharing-
conversations you've wanted to have, and that we've started to have out in the open is, hey, look, this is how we get to a certain point by reducing expenses.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a conversation that we should have with the community about our revenues.
Yes, that's
Right?
correct. And I brought that up
But
too.
having said that, we have a 2013 problem at the very least on our plate right now.
Mm-hmm.
Right now.
So I'm bringing up the curriculum director question. It seems like Kathy's interested in having the conversation, so since it's on the list.
I'll jump in on the curriculum director position too, and I think that's completely unfair to say that we're going to go back in time, because one of the things this board just approved was a social studies book that completes the program initial run-through of all the curriculum. And I think that, we're not a district that has 27 buildings. We have 4 buildings, and we have 2 elementary schools, 1 junior high and 1 high school. And I think the work that has been done so far to align the curriculum, I don't think anybody is demeaning any of that in any way, shape, or form. But I think if we're looking at millions of dollars or $1 million, I think that's a luxury that I don't think we can afford. And I'm not saying that all the curriculum work gets thrown out the window. I think that when you have to look at where it's happening. I don't think that anyone is asking the principals now to, quit their job as principal and take over this curriculum director.
No, but I think-
My opinion, as long as it's brought up, is that I think that we either leave it as eliminated or, as the WTA has suggested, reduce it to 50%.
Yeah.
Because we have had 3 years of aligning the curriculum. And again, I'll say the same thing. I think it's offensive to say we're going to go back in time, because we're not. We're not going to unravel everything we've done.
No, I don't think that it would unravel right away, but I think if it left completely vacant forever, it would have a tendency to possibly, unravel, or not unravel, but just not work as well as it has been working, and not
Just,
continue the way that it has. And I just want to say one more thing. We've made a huge investment in getting it to where it is, and a huge investment in all the textbooks and things like that. And I think that it's really important in all the work that the curriculum director has done in getting all of the teachers, working with each other and the strategies and everything that they've done. And, part of that cohesiveness is due to that person, kind of just getting everybody to work together.
And you're right. But what I'm saying is now we have a state that's broke.
It's not a luxury, and so.
Well, I'm just saying that if we're looking at things, and, if you go forward from here, the district already, has consultants that come in too. So that's not even on the table here. So it's like one of those things that, when you squeeze a balloon, something's got to go. And I think having that on here, and this is something that was brought to us last year, and it's being brought to us again, and it's being brought to us by the WTA. So I think it's a valid thing to discuss.
Again, for clarification, in 2002, up to 2002, the district had an assistant superintendent who was the de facto curriculum director. That position was eliminated in 2002 as a budget cut. In 2005, when I got here, that was the position of the curriculum. And so things don't start to unravel overnight and things don't necessarily go backwards, but you don't make the progress that you have made. And again, somebody has to manage those consultants. Somebody has to schedule that stuff. Somebody has to make sure that the teachers are meeting and working on implementing those textbooks and that the resources and the training get organized. And so clearly there is a significant deficit in eliminating the curriculum director. Doesn't mean that it can't be done, right? It wouldn't be on the list if we didn't think it could be done. However, over time, there's going to be loss there because you don't have somebody managing that process on a day-to-day basis. Because the principals, when there are other things that will be more immediate that will come to their attention other than making sure, the reading strategies are dealt with at a grade level meeting. They have many more significant child issues they have to deal with. And so if you eliminate that position, there's going to be loss to curriculum growth and cohesiveness over time. All right, and the district saw that in real effects from 2002 to 2005.
And that's, I guess, one of the things that we're going to have to talk about as we go forward. But, there's options there.
We just wanted to express our thoughts and opinions on that.
And that's all I was doing too. So.
Can I ask for a break?
Sure.
Yeah.
Take 5 minutes.
Sure.
Thank you. Be back at 9:10?
I agree.
Okay, let's take a break.
Fine with me.
Okay, I guess we were trying to figure out, Linda, did you have any more, did you have anything else to add to that? Because
Well,
I guess
you know what?
you're.
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
Here's what I would like to say.
Could you gavel one more time, just, I'd like you.
If everybody could take their seats, please. Thank you.
I'd like to hear what everybody has to say about this suggestion. I think that last board meeting, we went through these two lists pretty much line by line and had some discussion about it. I think that we're starting to kind of spin our wheels here a little bit. Not that I want to squash any discussion, but I think we need to look at least list one, and we need to make a decision as to whether or not we can recommend this, modify it and recommend it, but at some point, we have to come to the community with some kind of recommendation so that they can give us feedback. So I think I'd like that to be our goal in the next however long it takes for us to at least be able to look at list one and decide if we're okay with that in terms of a recommendation to the community so that the discussion can spread out.
Do we want to think about each board member thinking about that for next Tuesday night?
No, we want to do it now.
Oh, you want to do it now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
because-
Yes,
Thank you.
now.
So with that in mind, I think let's put the curriculum director discussion to bed if we can, and decide if we are going to keep it on list one as is, reduce it to 0.5, take it off completely. Let's all weigh in on that and be done.
Could I
with
ask
that
first
one.
what the .5 does? Because it's not an actual 50/50 split on that number, or is it? If I reduced that number to a .5 position, is there another saving? 'Cause sometimes when we reduce a number, you have different savings.
You would have less of a savings. That's the cost of a first, that's one of our non-tenured teachers with benefits effectively, right? So you'd save about half of that number,
That's in benefits and
more or
everything.
less, yeah.
Okay.
That's a rough estimate off, I mean, again, part of it depends upon how you structure it, who has the job, what other assignment they have.
So are you
Is
saying?
that going into a personnel discussion?
It shouldn't have to, I
No.
don't think.
I think that,
I'm
don't
just
think-
asking because you had asked that about
well,
the,
yeah, but the other, without going into a lot of
The
detail.
other one
Okay.
touches
Yeah.
collective bargaining, this one
Okay.
doesn't.
Yeah.
okay. So you're asking for, I say we leave this on list one.
Yeah, but,
That's
so
mine.
can I just ask for clarification on, so if we change that to .5, would that be the only thing that this position would the curriculum director then also have other responsibilities in the district?
I mean, the off-the-top assumption would be that that person would also have some sort of teaching assignment at that point then.
Okay, so then,
Ms. Civic would remain whole, and, somewhere along the line, there'd be some other staff member who was made part-time.
And that's because
She has
she has
tenure.
tenure.
Yes.
okay,
Is
so
there-
then what does this number become?
Again, it would probably be about, again, that is based on the savings of one, non-tenured teacher. Our average non-tenured teacher with benefits it costs the district about $66,000. So it'd be about half that.
So if the board eliminated the curriculum director position, if that was the decision that the board made, then Ms. Civic would have the choice to go into the classroom.
She'd take any other job in the district in which she was qualified for, yeah, that was open.
Okay.
And you're saying if it went to halftime, then she would take a halftime position elsewhere as well?
Potentially. I mean, that would be my initial response.
But I guess one of the reasons I'm asking is because when we're talking about these other positions, they're being eliminated
Sure.
or reduced. Okay,
Right.
okay, just trying to
But like,
understand.
for instance, if you cut, I'm trying to look at positions where, somebody's certified to do more than one thing, right? So if you cut the 612 reading specialist just as an example, then the person who's in that position will bump, some other teacher who has less seniority potentially.
And I think that's part of the conversation that we need to have, because that is not on here, so.
What is not on there?
That right here, it says cut 6 through 12 reading special, it just
Right.
says 72,000. It doesn't say then that would bump somebody else in that. So that's the question that I think we're having, that I think that we need to have.
Okay, let me try to explain in general terms what happens, all right? There are two general types of employees in the district, certified employees and non-certified employees. Certified employees who've been here more than 4 years have tenure if they've been full-time.
I understand that.
Okay, so effectively, if you eliminate anybody here, the basic rule is you have to eliminate all the non-tenured staff before you eliminate any tenured staff. And so if you eliminate, one classroom teacher, you're going to eliminate in most cases, the least senior non-tenured teacher, assuming certification all works out. For instance, when you eliminate the Westmont High School or Westmont Junior High Foreign Language, you're going to eliminate that French and Spanish. The people who teach those positions, who happen in both cases to be tenured, are going to be made whole. Then whoever's been eliminated, all right, who's tenured, they're going to have to be found another position in the district, all right? And then some non-tenured teacher is going to be reduced. Right? So that happens in every single one of these cases, and until the board makes their decisions as far as who they're going to eliminate, there's no way for me to say, if you eliminate this position, what all the possible permutations are, unless we know how they all fit together. Right? Does that make sense? And then with non-certified employees, it's based on seniority within the position they're in, within their bargaining unit. And there are caveats to that, but basically it's by seniority. So the last person hired is, generally speaking, the first person reduced.
So tenure guarantees a position, but not necessarily a salary, as far as the salary's remaining the same, at the same level, right? Or does it?
No, it does.
It does.
Yeah.
They're in the same step and same lane, regardless of what they're
The
teaching.
only
in.
the only exception to that would be somebody who's on an administrative contract, who's tenured, would just move to their appropriate place on the teacher's salary scale.
So for instance, what we're talking about then, curriculum director, the first list we had that about 135,000.
Correct.
So now this says 66, because if the board chooses to eliminate the curriculum director, then the curriculum director will take a different position, so the savings is 66,000.
Right.
Okay. I'm just adding on, because that doesn't say that there. That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm asking.
If the position's eliminated, it
Right.
doesn't mean the person's.
Right.
And in that
Right. And
context,
right.
that's why I don't, and I realize there are questions about it, but for me personally, the staffing decisions are not my decisions. I'm making economic decisions at this point. So while understanding it is important, I mean, I think from my vantage point, the reason I'm not asking how that all works is because that's dance floor. It feels like dance floor to me.
Thank you, Dan. I agree with you. I'm glad you mentioned that.
So to the extent that I see that as a list number one, that's my input, so. Anyone else?
I'll leave it on list number 1 as well.
The whole position, the curriculum director as a whole, you're leaving on the list to cut. I will agree to reduce it. I won't agree to cut it. I think it's a very important piece to the district and to the forward movement of this district, and I would hate to see it go away, because I know what happens when it does go away.
I agree with this concept, notion, principle, that in the long run, our unit district needs a curriculum director. It needs a curriculum director. Right now, if I'm going to preserve programs in classrooms, I can't carry one.
At all?
No. So I'm going to say that we leave it as is, as a full reduction on the front list.
Well, I
Where
leave it.
do we go
on-
to, I mean, the second list puts me in an uncomfortable place overall, more so, the first list isn't wonderful, but the second list is even harder. I know this isn't part of this conversation, I know I'm trying to state it in the numbers, but I do like the reduction, but I don't have a replacement. So that's my angst.
Well, I think we can find a replacement. Actually, the replacement would be reduce the certified nurse position to .2 and hire the 2 RNs. That's 46,000 right there.
That's
actually
what
more
I
than covers
would
it.
do as well.
So it would be my recommendation to leave it on list 1 at 50% at .5.
Me too, and I feel like that's a big compromise, but
So
So it would be reduce the curriculum director to .5, and then pick up the certified nurse line off of list 2 and move it to list 1?
But I'd
Let me
prefer
back
to
up.
have a conversation about that piece of it off this table.
but
So,
that
right-
would be my recommendation, and I think Kathy said the same thing.
So, Diane, just for the question at this point is, do you want to leave that on page 1 or page 2? Or do you want to hold off?
I'd rather
voting
hold
on it?
off to have the conversation
Okay.
about the RN piece.
So we're at 3 and 3, so we have to hold off on what we do with that.
Okay,
On that one.
Well,
all right.
but I think that we can at least agree to, could we not agree to leave the curriculum director on at .5?
No, my suggestion was to leave it as it is.
But I just
For the
asked
time, for the time being, to leave it
question.
as is. and
Leave it
then-
as is.
And then take comment.
Yeah,
Isn't
Again,
that the way we
these
started the
aren't- These
conversation?
aren't done.
right.
These aren't done. But for the time being, to leave it as is on list 1. And we're going to continue to talk about it.
And continue to talk about
And
it.
continue to talk about it.
Okay.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
definitely. So,
But at this point, I think we need to create a model that gets us to 2013 so we can just kind of move forward.
Okay, so the next item on the list.
Or is it,
Is there anything else about list 1 then?
Is there anything else on list
That we
1?
need to talk about?
just from the position I'm at, and it's, obviously in the big scheme of things that we're talking about, in terms of the eliminating printing copies of the public packet for board meetings, I've kind of looked into this, at what other districts do, and I've seen that other districts have 10, or average, like 10 copies available for board meetings, but that before the board meetings, they're up online so people can print them. So I would like to see that, especially from the chair I'm sitting in, to have at least a few at the board meetings, but have all of the information online so people can download that themselves. And so then I think that I can live with that one.
I'm fine
If
with
we-
that, too. I mean,
if
if
we-
people can have the information, when we put the agenda up on the website, then they can take their time and look over the pieces and print the couple of pages. Maybe they're only interested in having a few pages of it.
Exactly.
They can just print what they want for the board meeting, but have the whole thing available ahead of time.
I feel strongly that I don't want to see it eliminated entirely. So, but it could stay on page 1.
So are we leaving that on or taking it off?
We're leaving it on.
Leaving it on.
Leaving it on,
Leaving it on.
would,
I,
it begs the question, if we copy 10 copies per, how much do we save? Not
Probably
for
less than
tonight.
$250.
Yeah, not for tonight.
I mean,
Not for tonight.
Normally
Just-
Judy makes about
just to
20
answer
copies.
the question.
So the short answer is $250.
Okay.
$250?
Because we usually make 20 copies, so
20 copies.
20 minus 10 would be half of that.
Okay.
And I'm assuming this is mostly a labor cost?
Paper and labor, yeah.
That's not labor.
Labor is not
Yeah. It's
probably
cost.
figured in.
No. No, Judy? I'm like-
Anything
So-
else on list 1 that anyone wants to? Or list 2?
Okay, so we have a list 1.
We have
I
a
don't
list 1.
have a complete answer on field trip transportation.
I think I had suggested taking that from list 1 to list 2
replacing it
and
with,
replacing it with
Panther prints and,
the elimination of CAC meetings during the day for which subs are needed, and Panther prints.
Okay, but I just want to clarify that we're going to go into closed session, and we are going to talk about swapping certified nurse from page 1 with .5 of curriculum director. So when we say we have a page 1, I just want to make sure that that's still
Sure.
a discussion we're going to have in closed.
Sure.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay. So we have a page 1 and page 2.
well, we don't have a page 2 yet, because right now, page 2 says $878,000 on it.
and we need,
If we want to get to 2014, we don't need 878,000. We need about 400,000. or maybe 425 or 430. So, and I guess, I'll view it this way. Whatever list we create out of page 2 is most definitely painful, ugly, hateful, disgusting, but let's find $400,000 that we can at least put out for conversation that gets us to 2014.
Are you suggesting, Dan, that we do that this year? Is that something that we have to do this year?
As a second option, yes.
If you don't do it this year, then you just need to cut that much more.
That much more next year.
I know,
Yeah.
I understand.
You throw it out there. And then you solicit feedback.
Okay.
We've already
Okay.
heard that the WTA
Okay.
would prefer that we stagger these cuts. We already, I have a fair, I don't think I'd be speaking out of turn to suggest that parents would be more inclined to wait than cut. But I think we have an obligation and a responsibility to put out there for conversation, this notion of getting to 2014.
Okay.
Right, and the
I just-
possibility of revenue
Right.
Yeah,
in the interim.
simultaneously, yeah.
Right.
So
Okay.
I'll throw out that I've got check marks next to some lines that get to a sum of $434,000. And my check marks go seasonal grounds.
So just, these are the ones you would put on the list?
Yeah, just
You
to
would
get,
put on the
to
list?
get to $434,000.
The dollar amount.
Dan,
It's on
Yeah.
one.
can we take a look at the potential revenue enhancement?
It's already in the model.
It is already in
The
the model?
assumption that's in that model is that
Yeah.
we will do every single one of those.
And we still
That,
have
if
to
you take
come
a
up
look
with
at the
400?
spreadsheets, they're on,
14, yep.
Okay.
that additional $120,000 is in the bottom under revenue enhancements.
And the 120, I talked about this last time, it's 120 instead of 136 because I anticipate probably higher fee waivers, especially with the economy as it is.
Can you say that
I
again?
anticipate people to apply for fee waivers more than they have in previous years because of the economy. So that's why I didn't just plug in straight out 136.
Because we had 136 on the list before, and you plugged in 130.
When you
You all have
combine
not
them all.
approved that
Right.
increase either
Yeah.
yet, so I'm not going to make the assumption that it's
Which you'll
just-
need to do next board meeting.
Additionally, we should say out loud, Kathy, option A includes moving class sizes to 28 for K through 2 and 30 to 3 through 5. So our model, our first model, Get to 2013, includes a class size adjustment presently.
Again, but in reality, it only has an impact on one classroom.
On one, yeah, exactly.
Now, again, who knows what what our registrations will be.
Understood.
It
know
includes changing the class size for both K through 2 and for 3 through 5?
Correct, because right now it's 25 K2 and 28 3-5, and so it takes them both up.
I read today that Chicago's looking at 37.
I don't think that's who we really want to compare ourselves to.
I'm just
Did that
saying,
once, I don't.
just saying. So, yes, Kathy, to answer, to get to 2014, we need 400,000 off this page. If we can't count, we're eliminating this conversation right now about grade level centers because effectively, we think that we would lose Title I funding, which basically just offsets all the savings based on this model.
Potentially. And again, over time, there's clearly savings to be had for grade level centers. But there might not be as much initial savings.
Absolutely.
for grade level centers.
So, again, I picked a handful of items that get to $434,000. It starts with the seasonal grounds position. It continues with the certified nurse. It continues with the elementary club stipends, except lunch, recess, and bus duty. It continues with industrial arts. Continues with junior high sports or raised participation fees. It continues with the librarian positions, both at the high school and junior high, as well as the elementary buildings.
So both of those?
Both of those. It continues with the technology director. And it continues with the dean position. that gets you $434,000. And the message to be sent is, that's what this looks like.
Oh, my God.
If we have to get to 2014 and we don't have new revenue.
Question, and there's a million, but just on the, you brought up the eliminate all junior high sports or raise participation fees. The or raise participation fees, do you have any kind of ballpark figure of what that could possibly be?
No, that $45,000 number is limiting the sports straight out. So I'm going to assume we wouldn't raise $45,000 in fees.
Right, as an example.
Set.
I know one case where high school was going to simply straight out eliminate a sport, in this particular case hockey, a very expensive sport, so it's an extreme example. But the high school in question had basically a $100 athletic fee at the time. And the parents who wanted hockey said, we'll pay whatever the costs are, all right, we'll cover the costs entirely. So the athletic fee for hockey was $876. The kids still participated, the district kept the program, but obviously there was a large financial commitment on the part of the parents who wanted that.
That one, I guess, not that any of them are easy.
All of them,
Or all of them
horrible.
are. But I worry about, because the one thing I've seen at obviously it's out there like sophomore sports at a high school district. And I guess, before we eliminate like everything at one whole school, I would like to look into other areas.
It's fine. I mean, again, given that these are all horrible, I'm wedded to exactly none of them.
Well, and that's why I say that, when I look at, like, certainly like the bills that we pay every month, and again, I'm just going to talk out loud, we pay a trainer every month. Is there some way that could be cut in half or something?
We're required by our conference to have the trainer at all of our events, and basically that's the only time our trainer's there. We cover our events, and then actually works with students who've been injured, and that's it.
And I guess looking at, things other than what's on this list. And that's why I'm asking, do we have to, your thought about, yes, do we have to do it now? Do we have to do it later? There's potentially other areas that aren't even on these lists before we take all sports out of one whole school. So,
And again, I
Just
think
out there.
the objective is, and just to be clear, the objective is to create a second model. It's not to, and it's to send this message, and it's a twofold message. If there's no new revenue, this is what it looks like. And it doesn't have to be this specific, like it's specifically that this is what it looks like, but this is what it looks like in general.
Right.
If you have to find this kind of money.
And obviously, Dan, you picked the things that were the biggest expenditures on this list, and that's the kind of stuff that has to go to make up this kind of money. I think that's the message. I mean, clearly, it's horrendous to think about losing these things.
Yeah, and I
But Dan
tried
picked
to-
out all the things that were, with the exception of the reading specialist, all the things that were kind of the most expensive items on this list.
And I tried to, other than industrial arts, I tried to completely, as much as humanly possible, and with respect to what Grant and the WTA mentioned last week, keep it as far away from the classroom as you can. But it's devastating, even if you keep it away from the classroom.
Well, and again, you don't because
You don't,
many
because-
of these
yeah,
have
yeah.
direct impact on the classroom.
Understood.
But we did talk last week about, in terms of cutting industrial arts and replace with study hall, that certainly doesn't have to be study hall, it could be another elective.
Well, no, it really becomes study hall because if you cut industrial arts, and you put them into other classes, you have to have more sections of those other classes in most cases. So if you are going to just, across the board eliminate industrial arts or, family consumer science or the tech elective at the junior high, you're going to be able to put a finite amount of students into those other sections. but you can't double the amount of kids, for instance, in food service, the food courses to make up for the fact. So
Well, that's
very
good.
clearly, they're going to go to, a certain percentage of kids
Right.
who are in industrial arts will just simply end up in a study hall.
It's going to depend on enrollment patterns,
Enrollment.
though.
It does.
Right. And it also, it goes to the question, that one of the things I had asked about last week was in terms of the numbers in the different classes, because obviously foods, you have a finite number that you can have in the classroom because of what it is. But I would imagine that perhaps there would be other classes at the junior high or at the high school that you could put kids in if there's 20 kids in there.
Yeah. Again, but to figure, the enrollment pattern is such that there's going to be clearly some loss, and some kids are just not going to find another space. If you eliminate fifths of teachers, they're not all going to take choir.
Right.
Where you can put, 100 kids in the class. Most of our classes, you can't do that.
Right. But some we can. And this industrial arts, is this across the district, or this is just?
It's at the junior high.
So this is just junior high?
Correct.
All right, so that's,
So, I'll just throw out, if people want to sort of, take one off, take two off, put two on or something, again, I'm just throwing these out there because they happen to add up to 434. But we need to create a list that we can stick into a model and say, look, this is how we get to 2014, and we need some feedback on that.
The technology director, was that one of them you had?
It is.
yeah.
Is that a part-time position right now?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yeah, we cannot do without that.
Well, at the risk of anything else, I know it says here, reduce assistant principal at the junior high school to part-time, 50%. Is there, again, is there any particular reason why it's just the junior high?
Because that's what
Because
somebody suggested.
First, and it used to.
I get that.
It used to exist
Right.
that way. And then you've already eliminated the dean on the list at the high school. And so if you're going to reduce the assistant principal and the dean at the high school, Mr. Carr probably won't come back.
Well, we haven't eliminated anybody. It's just on the list.
I understand that. But if you're putting a list together,
Right,
if you're going to cut both of them,
right.
that it's not a possible option if you're already cutting the dean, to say, okay, we're going to cut the assistant principal. You're already cutting one full administrator at the high school, and it's pretty much, it doesn't matter which one you cut. It's, the savings are relatively similar. And if you reduce the junior high principal to part-time, or the assistant principal to part-time, there's a savings there.
And if we go to the eliminate frosh soft sports at the high school, that's something that I'm seeing that other districts are eliminating sophomore. Is there some way to know the difference in those two?
Well, the only district that I'm aware of that eliminated sophomore sports is Chicago. And there's savings is about $20,000 for eliminating freshman sports because they don't travel as often. The other issue is if we eliminate sophomore sports, if you remember what Mr. Carr gave you last week, in your packets that you read, we'd get kicked out of the conference most likely. And so we wouldn't have anybody to play because they're going to anticipate having a sophomore game and a varsity game. And they're back to back. So there's some potential savings there. But in reality, that's not a real, tenable way to cut.
Was Mr. Carr's letter made public?
Not that I'm aware of. I don't think it's been put out there.
I think there's some very useful information
Or I
for
would
people
do
to
that.
understand what these.
Before I do that, I would want to ask him.
No,
'Cause
I know. I'm just
all of
saying-
the people involved in making those cuts put those,
Right, it
put
doesn't
something
even
together,
have to
but
be his letter, but if we could
he was
say
the only
what
one
would
who was
happen.
willing to, yeah, and we can
This
put
is what
something
would
together
happen if we do this.
to that impact. So,
Or even ask him if there's a version of it he would be comfortable with publicly.
I can do that.
Thank you.
Did all the, was that a request of all the building principals that they put together, the kind of an impact statement?
That was the request of everybody who was involved in those meetings about making recommendations. In fact, you saw the one that the WTA drafted, and then the other ones, I only shared those with the board that I was told I could at that point in time, was be at liberty to share with the board. So,
Is there any way we could ask, as long as we're asking for one building, we look at the others?
I can combine them in some sort of form that is more generic, so they're, people's individual thoughts aren't necessarily clearly out there as theirs. I think that makes a lot of the staff uncomfortable. They'd rather see it in a composite form than, somebody's individual thoughts.
But we have one.
Because he was willing to share it. The others were not. I can go back and ask the same question
Okay.
again, but
Okay.
my assumption is the answer would be the same.
Is there any way to get a breakdown, rather than eliminating all sports across, the junior high or whatever, but eliminate a particular sport, say
Sure.
from junior high through high school?
Sure.
So that, if that's a route that the board would want to look at and.
As a side note, part of the reason I put a check by it, and the first time I saw it, one of the conversations that I think people have had is, we have a park district that has a, very robust sort of sports program and different programs that they incorporate, particularly younger kids up through the junior high ages. To the extent that you ever had to go to to that sort of level of draconian, eliminate those sports, the rationale supporting it would be that, we need to partner much more effectively with the park district.
And again, and the Park District can do some things, again, as you said, through K-8.
Yeah.
But, they really can't run high school programs, obviously, because they just wouldn't, the teams wouldn't be recognized as part of the IHSA.
Can we at least entertain the idea of looking at a sport?
Sure.
And
Do you want us to break them all down, or do you have some in specifics you would like to see?
Well, I guess my thought would be the
sense.
ones that start in junior high and go through high school. Just, that everything?
Well, which one are those? I guess it's soccer,
There are
right?
very few, the only
Basketball?
exceptions are football that doesn't start at the high school, and,
At the junior.
that doesn't start at the junior high, and swimming, which does not continue to the high school. everything else, pretty much, we have, 7, 12.
Yeah, but swimming, there's barely a cost to that, because,
Right, well, there's some minor costs.
But that's not one of those that goes from the junior high to the high
Correct.
school. Can we get a breakdown of what
Sure.
the sports that go from the junior high to the high school?
Yeah.
I guess what was this, because I'm thinking back on the finance committee notes, that was mostly broke down by high school, it had kind of the high school sports separated out, but the junior high component was all lumped together.
Yeah.
Because they're not broken out in the
Break 'em
budget.
out. Next year,
So-
we're going to break them out, especially since you've asked for it.
It's,
'cause
it's
creating
much
that.
more work for Maureen, but it can be done.
Because, I guess, again, nothing's easy, but I worry then about if we eliminate all sports, what does that do to the high school feeder? I understand that the Park District offers things, and I know, just from living here for a long time, they have a lot of programs for the younger kids. In fact, I don't have the answers to whether they have junior high. So if we're eliminating, if one of the things that we're talking about is eliminating all sports at the junior high, we should probably have a conversation with the Park District before we just say that everybody can go to the Park District. So that's,
Well, that becomes a, that's sort of small-town thinking, which is, in smaller towns, you can have a small high school that has high school teams and has high school sports and competes in conference, but their junior high isn't big enough to do it, so they have to leverage their town, which means little things like a football coach going to the football coach of the Park District teams and saying, hey, look, here's my system, teach it to my kids. So it really becomes, a strategic conversation in addition to
Absolutely.
saving money. We need
Absolutely.
to partner.
right. Well, and I like where we're going with this, and we've got some nice things from the Park District, working with the the playgrounds, we've got the village working with us, so it's a good conversation to have. But I'm just saying, I think that should be part of the conversation as opposed to just saying, eliminate it and send them over there. So that's my 2 cents.
That's what we want to do.
For conversation, to leave it as Dan suggested, or to adjust it?
Well, let me go back to, because again, Linda brought out a good point, that they're the top ones, the big ones. In terms of, reduce, and don't shoot me, reduce one Westmont High School counselor, is there any possible way that can, I mean, that's another one of the big ones. I know that in the past, there was one.
You could make that a half-time position if you wanted to.
Yeah, I'd say, if you wanted to do a little swap, you could swap that spot for the dean.
Say that again?
In other words, if you wanted to say, hey, look, let's look at, in terms of just this list, just the list, in terms
Right.
of just talking about it.
Right.
Eliminate the counselor, at that point, we've got, right now, the list I sort of just checked off fairly quickly added up to 434.
Right.
So if you said, okay, we could look at the counselor, you basically could add back in the dean.
When I think, Steve Carr and others have articulated that to eliminate the dean is probably a pretty significant safety issue. In fact, I think articulated, and somebody actually handed to the board president a copy of the cuts that were made in 85, 86, which I shared with you a couple meetings ago. And as I think I articulated at the time, the only position that was really brought back from all those cuts was the dean, because they found an untenable situation to eliminate that position.
So, I mean, I'd be fine with that notion of just bringing back a dean and putting a counselor on the list.
What about
and
a
I hate
halftime for the
option.
dean?
I have to say it out loud again. I hate all of these.
With the halftime dean, the question will become, do you want students disciplined in the morning or the afternoon? And I don't mean to be flip, but that's really the question you'd be asking.
And if you
can't-
have,
It's either a full-time position or it's not a position, because when they're not there at that particular time, they're either gonna be called out of class constantly to deal with things, or one of the other administrators is gonna end up dealing with it anyway. So it's, in many ways, the dean is pretty much an all or nothing thing.
But to say that, you're diminishing any role that the high school principal and the assistant principal can take in terms of.
No, they're constantly dealing with discipline anyway.
So if that was.
They are already stretched very thin, our
Absolutely.
administrators at the high school.
Absolutely.
And, you talk about the counselor position. I mean, one of the things that has really, really changed in the last several years is the kind of services our kids get in terms of preparing for college and doing everything they need to do to get into college. I mean, I've gotten tons of feedback from parents about how much better that is. I'd like to make a suggestion. I mean, I can't in good conscience recommend really any of these things that add up to $439,000. The one thing we can do is make 3 different lists that add up to $439. They're all going to stink.
Yep.
They're all going to be something that nobody's going to be able to stomach. And I think we have to put it forward and say, this is what we're faced with. What do you want to do? I mean, because I can't recommend any, any of these. I mean, I can recommend the little ones that are going to save us $1,000 or $750 or something like that in a couple years from now. But I cannot, in good conscience, do this.
Should we just leave 2 then and get input?
Well, I'll tell you what, I mean, here's a thought then. Rather than try to pare it down, why don't we just pick a number, Maureen, and I don't know if we can do it in the model. Can we simply pick a number as an expense reduction and feed it through to make a 2014 scenario that works?
What do you mean, Dan? I'm not following.
In other words,
Just take $400,000 off the top of the budget.
425,
The only,
yeah.
What's he talking about?
the problem, I mean, yes, you can do that. Here's the problem with that.
And then just say, hey,
Is that
look, here's the
depending
list
upon-
we got to pick from.
All of those things grow in different ways.
Yeah.
So they don't give you really accurate information, because obviously supply costs are different than personnel costs versus, insurance costs. And so you can do that, but it really screws the model up.
Yeah, I understand.
Well, I would be interested in getting, when we have the public comment opportunity, and getting public feedback on this
I just
list.
think you get feedback on
Okay.
everything on the
There's no
list.
way I
That brings up a good point then. Do we want to talk about that in terms of the date? Does the April 27th sound right with?
I thought we were going to do that
Anybody?
next time. Didn't you say we were going to talk
Can-
about
can
that?
we
No,
do that at the
we had
next
tentatively
meeting?
put it on there just because, if we're talking about this and all these major cuts, we should probably start letting people know when we're going to do that, because that's 3 board meetings away from now.
But when you started the meeting, I asked for clarification about when we were going to have that discussion, and
Oh.
you said next meeting.
No, I meant not, at tonight's meeting. I said when we get to this point in the meeting.
Right, but you want to wait until
I mean-
April for the public to comment?
That's what I'm
A couple
asking.
thoughts. I mean, I'd love to have the district website has a comment module that we can utilize at this point, I think. And I'd love to utilize that. Obviously, what I'd like to do is at the very least, we're going to put out a 2013 model, right? And you mentioned that these lists are out on the website.
Yeah, they're on the website.
But they're, where are they on the website specifically?
They're right under news.
Under news, okay, okay,
And they were emailed out to everybody who's subscribed to any of the district's blogs.
okay.
Can we put it on the front page, or a button that says budget issues, just so people,
You can.
And then
I mean, I just-
and then
On the
hyperlink
business
to
office page,
Yeah.
so that
And just
they'll see
hyperlink to
all
that.
the other
I mean, it
reports for
just.
the last couple of years.
Yeah, it doesn't, I mean, if you put it just on the front page, then people who look for it later don't know where to go. I mean, clearly, the choice there that's news or board, I mean, news would take you to this information, so would going to the business pages.
Dan, what were you saying?
Oh, just the notion of, look, let's put this list one together in a model. Let's put it out there for public consumption, all right? Include within the context of that public consumption, this, and we got to pick a date for a public forum, right? And I don't know that I want to do it next week, because that doesn't give people time to do it. We have 2 meetings in April, April 13th and April 27th. Tentatively, either one of those dates is fine. I think we need to make final decisions in that first meeting that we have first or second meeting that we have in May. So then at that point, that predicates that we're effectively just gonna riff everything right now. Sadly, we're just gonna riff what was the other kind of?
You'll riff some tenured staff, and you'll non-renew
Non-renew, that's it.
non-tenured classified
So-
staff, and you'll honorably dismiss
But then-
certified staff.
But then, we'll visit these conversations as final decisions in May.
How heavy are the agendas for
That's a
those
good
2
question.
meetings in April? Any idea?
Well, the first meeting tends to have less on the agenda than the second meeting, because the second meeting has all the
Finance
business
stuff.
documents.
Yeah, I would hate to do it at the same time as that.
Yeah, then let's
So
do
I
it
would
on the
suggest doing
13th.
it
on the 13th?
Yeah.
on the
Okay.
13th.
The only reason is because I looked at the district calendar for all of April, and it's real busy. So that was the reason for, if we think we can have everything ready to discuss and have a public forum, let's do it on the 13th.
Well, I think, the 13th, I mean, we've pretty much discussed this a lot in the last 2 meetings, and I think we've given the community enough information. And if we haven't, they can certainly contact us
Okay.
and let us know.
Okay.
But I think
That's-
that'll give them some time to get, digest the information, ask whatever questions, get what other further information they need to be prepared to come on the 13th and, for the
Yeah,
public
okay.
hearing.
I just wanted to tell everybody that I just looked at the district calendars, and there's so much in April that it was kind of unwielding. So if we could do it at a board meeting, so. Okay, so then.
Does that sound good?
We'll do that on the April 13th? Does that sound right?
Sounds okay.
and then we'll work on getting that out there. And then where are we going to put, Dan, what were you talking about in terms of the website, comments? Can we,
Well, there's
already the ability on the website to make comments.
Yeah, and so you just, we should have an option somewhere that's visible, obviously, that takes you to a comment section. People can sign in and do that. I don't know if it's a sign-in. Can they do it anonymously?
Oh, it's sent electronically.
Okay.
and is it, where does it get sent?
It's on the website.
Goes to
It's
staff,
on the
and then
website.
whoever is the appropriate staff member deals with it.
Okay. And we
So,
can get that.
It's basic, I mean, all I'm suggesting is a temporary, forum, web-based
Right,
forum.
right.
Post your comments and thoughts, please.
Well, and that,
I think
and
that's an
For
incredibly
anyone?
poor idea.
Well,
Because they
isn't
have
that
to be
what this
filtered.
is?
No.
No?
No,
Okay.
that sends an email comment of
Oh,
whatever.
okay. Well, okay, so.
I don't
so
think
the
you want,
comment-
I mean, anything you were gonna do would have to be moderated
Okay.
to keep,
Keep
inappropriate
people,
things
yes,
in
yes,
there.
yes, yes,
And
yes, yes.
the massive amount of time that would take, and then who, who's gonna moderate it, who's gonna determine how it was appropriately moderated. I think that's,
So-
again, that's
so-
what the purpose of the public forum is.
Okay, so how
And
would
they
we-
should feel free, if they have comments, to email the board.
Okay.
That's what they should do.
what about if we do
So
this?
rather than
We
utilize-
gather those questions for the public forum.
Sure.
Yeah. But your recommendation would not be to just make that resident on the website per se? Okay.
Then, is there some way we can temporarily put these lists in the beginning, at the front, not to recreate the whole website? Is there
Yes,
some way
we
we can
can.
just temporarily till we
Yes,
make
we
these?
can.
Okay,
If that's what you want, we'll put them on the front page of the website.
yeah, just to make it easy, okay,
But right now, you have to choose news, and then they're there. So you have to click one button to get there.
right.
Isn't that
I don't
easy
think
enough?
we need to do any, he's just now said this, and I think for the whole community to click on news, and it takes you there. Is that not sufficient?
I think it is.
Well, it was
Rather
emailed to
than
everybody who
giving
signed
the
up.
staff
Right, I
more
know,
work
I'm
to
aware
do.
of that.
I
Thank
Is
you.
it, well, it's in, because because there's school news and then there's just
District
district
news.
news. So
Right.
it's
It's the
district
district
news.
news, yes.
Okay. Yeah, I'm fine. If people are going to our website, there's a good chance that they're web literate and and pretty good at clicking. So,
Okay, so we'll do that on April 13th, have a public forum.
Just for clarification, because I'm trying to figure out this other piece of this need of revenue. If, on the second list that, all of this list, that none of us like, and the fact that we're trying to get to the point where we're not seeing red all the time, is there a dollar amount that we need besides the $400, obviously, because we're still bleeding money after 414, correct, or 2014, correct?
yes?
It's just less money.
Yeah?
So is there?
No, it's more money every year, it's just we can,
But I mean, it's, by making these cuts, we're not as red.
we're not gonna run out of money as quickly. We will
But we're still not at a dollar amount that puts us,
effectively, without a referendum or massive cuts, you're not gonna put this district into a balanced budget.
Exactly. And I think the next step, right, we have a two-step process, if you will. The first step is this: we have to identify a certain level of cuts, just as a matter of pure fiscal responsibility. We must act today at a very, theoretically, at a list one level, just to give us at least 3 years of space. But when we do a strategic planning conversation, especially the finance component, needs to have a really big focus on how we're going to get back to a balanced budget conversation. That's going to incorporate, by that time, if we start it in August or September, we'll have some answers about some ongoing salary and benefit costs and some other answers that we need to plug into the model at that
What we're going to do with our aging buildings, what it's going to cost to keep,
So, I
the district
mean-
afloat for an extended period of time. I mean, those costs for like a tax hike, if that's what you want to, if you're wondering what that number would be on a referendum.
that's part of the conversation, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
to say it's.
I don't know what that is today.
It's also part of the PMA model that isn't shared until you're at the point where you're ready to plan for a referendum.
Yeah.
It's part of the model.
Okay.
So
You can say to do this, you have to have,
Yeah.
you know,
They can
you're
just
going to have to go
plug it in
up
and-
12 cents or 15
I mean,
cents.
well, yeah, I mean.
Well, it makes this
In a round
conversation-
number, our EAV, or equalized assessed value in our district is 620 million,
Right now, it's 594.
594? Okay. So at 10 cents per hundred, that gets you 600,000 bucks. At 10 cents per hundred, you know, people can do the math on their assessed values and figure out what that is. But 600,000 extra dollars plus the 600,000 in cost cuts that we have to institute right away, you know, I mean, that's the kind of scenarios that we have to talk about as a strategic planning conversation. Are we gonna have this revenue, or are we gonna have to cut?
More.
I hate this
Okay,
conversation.
so at this point, we have list one, we've taken one thing off of list one, put it on list two. And we've taken two things off list two and put it on list one. Is that right?
What did we take off of list one?
Took 2 on list 1,
We
didn't
took
we?
field trip transportation, right? Is that the one?
Yep, off, right?
And put that on list two. And we took eliminate all CAC meetings and eliminate Panther Prince newsletter and put that on page one. Other than that,
Did we do anything else? Oh, summer school.
Summer school.
Is already on here, it's already on here.
it's already on the list.
Summer school will not happen this year. That's the decision that's been made at this point.
Okay,
Can I share one piece of bright news? We actually had a donation for half the cost of the Thanksgiving
That's true, we did.
feast today from Cashman's Dollar, so,
Oh, good.
which is our architects. So if we can find another donor for the other half, we will not get rid of the Thanksgiving feast.
and that Thanksgiving feast is for
High school.
The high school.
High school,
high school students, okay.
Thank you, Linda.
it's like $1,500, right?
Yes.
That's good, that's fantastic.
Cashman offered
Isn't that
$750.
nice to end on a positive note?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Any other discussion in this area? So we will,
So we're only gonna do one model.
Yes, I have something.
yeah.
Can we have a discussion on where to hold this public forum? Because I really don't think
That's a good point.
this
Yeah.
is very conducive for a large gathering. I'm
Well,
sorry.
I think it's extremely conducive for a large gathering, especially since it's on television.
Well, I
we-
understand that piece of it, but the
this.
sound and the people sitting in the overflow room could not hear, couldn't see, other conversations are going on. I think people miss, when they're out in the hallway, miss being in this room to have the conversation.
I would, there is a slight cost to, I mean, I feel very strongly that we have to have it on television, so if we do have it on television, I would have to look at the agreement that we have, because
Let's,
I think
yeah, I mean,
we had
I would, you know, we
Special-
should, we
was
clearly
2 in the
should,
meetings.
please, yeah, please talk to, yeah,
Yeah.
let's talk to
Yeah.
Ron and others and figure out.
And get that.
What it means, what it would mean to go to the natural place, which is the high school
Yeah.
auditorium.
I would very
To the
much like
extent that there's,
Absolutely.
And I,
Do
you know,
we
I sort of agree
wanna-
that that's,
Yeah, I
Okay.
think it should be on TV, though.
yeah, as long as we can do that,
I would agree with that as well,
Yeah.
but see what they say.
yeah, okay.
Okay, I just have one question, going back to the CAC meetings, and I'm sorry, I'm a day late and $1 short. I'm a little tired this evening. We were up late last night, right, Linda? Right. How is that going to play out as far as if those are cut during the day? Are we going to just eliminate them, or are we going to?
Well, you'd either
Have
have to
them
do them during
happen.
SIP days or during the four
after
institute
school.
days, or, in some relatively small ways after school. Again,
Okay.
participation after school isn't the same as during the day because so many of our staff members coach or sponsor clubs, et cetera. So it's very difficult, especially in the spring, to get teachers to after-school meetings.
And if they do this during the SIP days, then does that not?
Well, there's something else that doesn't get
Displace
done.
something
Correct.
else.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're having a significant impact on professional development by doing that. Now, you clearly save positions, but you do have a very significant impact on staff development and curriculum development.
And that the WTA was okay with this?
They put it on
Yeah,
their.
it's on
It's
their
on their
list.
list.
Yeah, as yeah, as
Yeah.
some, and I don't want to mischaracterize it as acceptable, but something that was less untenable than other stuff.
Okay, any other comments in this area?
I just want to make sure that these meetings don't not happen, because I think that these CAC meetings are very important.
They won't happen in the same way if they're not done during the school day, because you just won't have the same amount of attendance. Because people who, coach or have sponsors, just won't be there in the same way. When you're doing it during the day and people are required to be there, they'll be there. When, it's more of a volunteer activity, you're not going to have the same level of participation.
Well, again, this goes back to our curriculum, which goes back to affecting students. So
I don't understand how that's not obvious.
I am not comfortable with having this on the list.
Let's put it back to page 2 then.
Put it back on page 2?
Put it back on page 2.
Okay. On page 2. Okay, any other discussions on that? Okay, are there any public comments?
Good evening. I'll try to keep it short. I know it's been a long night. My name's Gary Armstrong, by the way, and we've been talking about these two baseline models, these GSA models, and the one without the general state aid. And every proposal you have across here, it's affecting class size. And of course, we've all agreed all night long that what we're really trying to do is not affect the students, or at least as little as possible, yet affecting class size is going to have the biggest impact on it. Now, I look over the teacher's proposal, and the teacher's proposal does not affect class size. So I would like to see a base model put together using the WTA's recommendations instead of the board's list that they've come up with tonight, and see what that looks like plugged in, because that doesn't affect class size. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments? No? Okay, the chair will entertain a motion to go to closed session for the purpose of discussing personnel issues.
So moved.
Roll call, please.
Mrs. Thomas?
Yes.
Mr. Price?
Yes.
Mrs. Lubeck?
Yes.
Ms. Kelly?
Yes.
Mrs. Charlton?
Yes,
Mr. Charleston?
Yes.
Ms. Casey?
Yes.
and there will not be a vote.